Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea. If each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from, also give a like. And subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The summer I got a job here, I was 17, and it was a good year. Ellen Ditzworth used to work the hot dog stand, and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us. Wet hands and damp cigarettes, but it was near her station, and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way, too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride-goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. One time, when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd long felt uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk, and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking while everyone went back to the real world. Usual guy had walked, and they needed someone bad. Last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that, it turned into a ghost town, and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in, and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay some of my gas, not all of it, but enough to help out. Only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends around so long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for the entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told him when the park reopened in March, I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on, get a degree like some of my friends had, or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. World was wide open to me, and I figured I'd sit on my ass all winter, make a shit ton on overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditzworth or two. Yesterday I turned 38, and I'm still in the park. Government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. A lot of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died, and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8FT steel palisade fences. Gave me the keys to the only gate and scarpered real quick. Gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle, and accelerate out the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park, and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling head first down the Astro Missile water slide, one of those up and down kind of slides that have you bouncing along on a padded dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. Thing is, depending on weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 mph, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that got stuck in the roof. 15 years later, and that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening. Darkness inside heavier than the night around it. Bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. They think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black, looking for an exit that should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park. But we had a couple hundred serious ones every year, usually one a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry, saying the road just kept going right forever and they'd had enough of this shit. Out of order signs would go missing. Sometimes kids would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant I started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it policy to have name tags on us at all times, and if the kids said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one on, he'd tell us all to forget it. Like it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looking unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips, so fucking cold it hurt just to hold him, and I wondered if I was holding someone dead when, out of nowhere, another kid slammed into me so hard I went under. Scared me shitless cause for a second or two. It was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool. Almost like there wasn't one. Just blue forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor and I surfaced only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay, said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide. But really it was my own dumbass fault for standing there in the first place. Guy at the top swore on his life he'd never got any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years they've only got worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue. But at night it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch-black toilets, or to check one of the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot, moved around. Once one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m. and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park. But winter came and went without any real incident. First day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water. Broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued he threw money at me. Told me he'd cover the medical bills and sit me up in my trailer and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I going to do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money and had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better, but unfortunately, I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again, and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site, and I needed money. I took it thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. Second time round was a lot worse. Part of it was me, 23 years old and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. Spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart, as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came round with his girlfriend for a couple nights. She grouched the whole time, hated sleeping in the trailer while I stayed in a tent outside. But she hated the park too, said she felt watched all the time. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides, saying something had come out of it, and was in the pool swimming around. But when we looked, we didn't see nothing. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle, though. Funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got real freaked out. They left in a hurry, another car's tires screeching as it hauled ass out of here at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened. But if she didn't like the park, well, I guess it didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. Found myself getting cut up like crazy doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time, even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then one night I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to or from it, like it just appeared there out of thin air. It stank like hell, though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in a dumpster. But I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging, so I slept in the tent instead. Pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell, but I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up, like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight, and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later, and I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself as I shuffled over in my tighty-whities, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent, but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went in two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I had closed the tent and just forgotten it. The other said something or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was to get in my car and drive until the sun rose. But I was already half cut and knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing, and you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a step towards the tent, and I shone my light at it, hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself to, and then I was looking inside my tent and there was nothing there. I crawled inside quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way, and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall, and that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me, palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point, makes my skin crawl just to remember it. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment I saw it, the way I might see a spider. Equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips, and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of an empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its ass off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. Only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the damn tent. When I finally climbed free, there was no one waiting for me. Only a couple wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared shitless and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. Couple days later, Something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in because one of the faucets was running. I just turned it off when the door slammed shut and I couldn't get it open again. Had to kick the lock out, which isn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. Second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. Found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Someone I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel watched, feel like you're walking into a situation someone planned, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. Finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. Spent the rest of the summer laid up on my dad's sofa drinking and watching daytime TV. Got a call off the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy 'cause some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. Said he'd just spent the day in court hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. Poor guy was way out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, but he told me it was me, or some 17-year-old lifeguard, who'd shown interest in the job, and I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted, and when I went back that third time I took a gun, and this time I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I let it run. Hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I let them stay on until morning, when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that'd been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. Thought I had it all figured out, and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me too. I'd found the guy sleeping in one of the brick-and-mortar bathrooms. We gotta keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old fuck. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit, though. Wasn't like he'd parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then, only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was to just walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night, and I knew it was going to get real bad out there. "Hey!" I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look, man, it's late, I'm sure." My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired, and I knew he wasn't ever really going to be thankful for some randomer's charity. But that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For a moment, the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right. Was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways. His body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him to touch solid ground was his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about. A percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I'd go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds, everything turned to a kind of white noise, as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear, paralyzed me. Million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. That blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire, but I was stuck mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair, but he still managed to look at me for just a moment, before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my ass into my gear, and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pool cover. Machine ran loud as it drew the blue heavy sheet back across the water. Felt like eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over and I could look down into the water and see clearly, there was no one there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane, and I even looked over and double-checked that the guy's plastic bag was still where he'd dropped it, just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water were a couple leaves that had made it in there over fall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities, a bit like the hollow cube illusion, where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface with rays of diffuse light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark. Every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water, could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast, taste the salt, all of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters, and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon big. Like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly, it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me, and I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. Machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pool stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it had always been, but I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back round, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing, Jesus. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. Manager didn't have to fight me to get me to stick around for a 4th winter, or a 5th or 6th. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects. Getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through, I felt like I'd gone into fucking space and seen the world was flat, and now I had to just come on back and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. Government was looking to close it all down on account of the accidents, and the manager was down the station every other day for questioning. 4 kids missing that year alone. I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after closure until a demolition crew came in, but no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little, the park has become something unfamiliar to me. grass growing up between old tiles, pool water the color of cut grass and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down there, and the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water, and sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision, and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark, something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think what any of it means because I just don't want to know. Last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers, they call themselves, and I say kids, but really they were college students who record videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared, scouted the park, even scouted me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watched me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their van as close to the fence they could find, climbed the top and hopped on over. For about an hour they got what they wanted. I've watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti, smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor. Old pools full of ancient water covered in thick, brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter. And they were good at it, too. They stayed quiet. Didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. Wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream, maybe a few of them. It was blurry, and I came to around 3 a.m. and still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges, with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park, and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years, and things had only gotten worse. Set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense, primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess. It felt alien. Sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how it felt that night. I'd pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the castle, because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that the kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks, and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool, and there, just a couple meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. Probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least they'd tied it off so it was easy for me to pull back in. I gave it a cursory inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water, and saw a thin, shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering, and I realized I was looking at a girl, college-aged, with stringy hair and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal, shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself up onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, and wide eyes locked into a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle. and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I got the faintest glimpse of colorless scales the size of my hand and a thick muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook, and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just going to stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better to just go get her when the sun was up? I thought. But that was a pretty fucked up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing inside of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who's to say it wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point I made the decision. Don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sounds she was making. That and the knowledge she'd been in there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help, and I was the only one around who could give it. So once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to fuck with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. Half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole, but instead, whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow, that was even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get into the boat. I tried to keep the momentum, though. I didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, damn near shitting myself when the whole thing wobbled, and I briefly felt like I was going to lose my balance. But I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, "What the fuck are you doing?" While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life, and a third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was going to crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me, and I was about halfway there when I realized that if it was big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over like a shark, knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple waves rolling across the entire pool where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon at least. Hard to pin size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me that didn't really matter, it could eat me easy enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely, but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. It gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious. Not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off that water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up into full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. Didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance, and once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of the rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay or something like that. Tried my best to sound reassuring. Tried to let her know I was going to get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about the look on her face gave me pause, though. She wasn't scanning for danger. She was looking right at something, and before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it, or since. A head like seaweed, a face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's legs off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien, I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real, or if it was just bad special effects. And yet the moment stretched on and on, until something in that unknowable mind made a decision, and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. Last time she was on it, she'd nearly died, but there was no third option. It was stay and die, or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of the thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. For a few seconds I stood there dumbstruck, the girl crying, and water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple 100 meters away and hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the hell were we going to get off the castle now? Not a moment later, and the entire structure began to shake. By now the girl was close to hysterics, and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully, and looking up to see the girl going ahead without me. For a moment I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping, and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on top of the smooth plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I make it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were fucked. We'd delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart, so all its little pieces went floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. And then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came damn close. "Paddle!" I cried at the girl, and she did, and we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall, and we were dragging ourselves up onto dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far away enough from the water. Only once I felt safe, I let myself collapse and lay crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl, a painful, gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt, until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really, at least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster. But it did watch us calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. Hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow. Reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point, the girl passed out, and not long after, so did I. I doubt she ever made a full recovery. The only thing she managed to say, even hours later after the paramedics had sedated her, and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words "the stars" over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into that water and saw the abyss below, but that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swam in those waters, submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did, and somehow I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself, about what I've lost to it. Jesus Christ, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just gonna wait here forever and ever? There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditsworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday is gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never going to understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars. Because there is an abyss, and it doesn't flow through time like we do, doesn't occupy space like we do. But it's there, and it's full of gods, the way a koi pond is full of fish. And I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the part gets, and the closer I get to falling into waters that have no up or down, and which never ever end. In my dreams, I am choking in the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up. You might think the worst is over, but you're wrong. The next story is even more chilling. The police found her car parked on the side of I-70, abandoned. She was dead. Most people missing past 48 hours don't make it. We found her this morning in a wooded area. The dental records were a match. Yeah, it's her. How did... The autopsy hasn't been performed yet, but they're assuming it was blunt force trauma. There's an open investigation on details I can discuss. The phone went silent, and I nodded, in a daze. Feeling sick to my stomach, I told the officer I had to leave, hanging up the phone. Walking into my living room, I grabbed a pillow, crying until my throat hurt and my eyes swollen. Come on, you have to pull yourself together. I blew my nose and hiccuped. The silence was pierced by a phone call. This is Detective Thompson. I know this is a difficult time for you, but can you come into the station for questioning? S. Sure. All the tears had left my voice. At this point, everything was cold and numb, like wading through static. Will 3:30 work for you? No time was good for me, but what choice did I have? If I refused, it would seem suspicious. Yeah, I'll come down. I'm so sorry this happened, Miss Kelly. But the more information we have, the sooner we can solve this. Or the sooner you can lazily pin this on someone and close the case. I understand. You have my full cooperation. I want this solved too. All right, we'll see you then. The phone went silent. She had died horribly, and I was going to find out who did this and make them suffer. Suffer worse than she had. Outside of my house was a pile of firewood. I searched it until I found a plank of oak. I would make a spirit board, but not the cheap Ouija that Parker Brothers shilled out to curious teenagers. I carefully burned the words into the wooden panel. The smell of scorched cedar stung my lungs and my eyes were sore from crying. It didn't matter. I found a pattern of the sun and moon and followed each detail until both images were pristine. I struck my index finger with a sewing needle, and the thirsty wood absorbed my blood. Choosing a smaller block of wood, I carved a planchette. It was nothing more than a simple pointer, but it would work. Finally, I placed a photo of Lily at the top. By the time my work was completed, my hands were sore and the sun was breaking out over the sky. Concentrating, I asked what the board wanted. I was so exhausted, the planchette floated to the letters with no fanfare. GOTO sleep. Lily, is that you? Yes. How can I help? DREAM. The air suddenly grew cold and I wrapped a blanket around me. I wanted to sink into the couch, into the floor, and into the cold, damp earth, never to wake again. I woke to the weight of cold chains around my ankles, pleading with the man to let me go. The smell of exhaust at the engine started, and the searing pain at my body dragged against the road. I woke to my heart pounding and my couch drenched in sweat. It was dark out, the clock silently ticking. My phone read that it was close to 3 a.m., the witching hour. There were 5 missed calls from the local police department. I made some coffee and drank it black, enjoying its warmth and bitterness. My phone vibrated against me and answered. The tired officer on the other line, I told him that I passed out and I was sorry, and agreed to meet him in the afternoon for questioning. I reviewed my handiwork from the night before, a plain cedar board with ornate wooden letters carved into it. The sun and moon looked ornate. The yes and no were slightly off-center, but that didn't matter. I took some silver and gold paint and filled in the sun and moon before slapping a clear coat of lacquer over the board. Parker Brothers, eat your heart out. I got into my small silver car and left toward the police station, entering the office to a tired-looking officer with thinning hair. Candace Williams, I'm here to discuss the Lily Henderson case. The officer's eyes dropped. Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm Detective Thompson. Please come on back to the office. The office was surprisingly cozy. A simple desk with a computer sat next to a few office chairs. I took a seat in one as the detective sat across from me. Ms. Williams, can I get you anything? A coffee or donut, perhaps? He smiled warmly. Coffee, if that's okay. Sure thing. He left the room and came back with a small paper cup. It ain't Starbucks, but it'll get the job done. I am so sorry for your loss. Any information that you have about Lily that will help us solve this case would be greatly appreciated. Do you know what happened to her? A tear fell from my eye. It's still under investigation. We're working to resolve this for you and her family. He lowered his head. Do you remember the last time you saw her? I racked my brain trying to remember when I last saw her. It was 3 weeks ago. We were going to meet up and she never showed. I called her phone, she never answered. I thought she was busy. I should have checked in on her and have been a better friend. My chest tightened as tears clouded over my eyes. Candace, none of this is your fault. His tone calmed my frazzled nerves. I have a daughter and I'm terrified of what could happen to her. Ma'am, I'm going to do everything I can to get this monster off the street, but you've got to help me. Does she mention anyone following her? Any stalkers or any jealous ex-boyfriends? Lily did mention her ex. His name was James Martin, I think. They had a major falling out, and she stayed at my house for a few weeks. He had been harassing her online, but I never thought it would come to this. Do you know his address? What kind of vehicle he drove? Anything you can remember? A Toyota Tacoma, black. I don't remember a plate number. A flashback of the vision interrupted my thoughts. The black truck, the chains, the screaming. 663 yet, I think. I'm not 100% sure on it. It's okay. Anything you can remember. You're a great help. Do you want some water? You look a little bit peaked. I'll take some more coffee if you have it. You're going to be up all night. His warm nature made me smile in spite of myself as he refilled my cup of coffee and handed me a glazed donut. My stomach growled as I realized I forgot to eat since afternoon yesterday. Thank you. And it's okay. I work night shift. Understood. Do you remember anything else about James? He's a big guy, reddish-brown hair. He had a beard the last time I saw him. Lily would stay at my place to avoid him. He used to work at Wells Fargo with us before they had layoffs. Was he ever threatening towards you? Not to my face. He didn't like her hanging out with me. That's really all I have right now. Okay. Are you okay to drive home? His eyes had a fatherly concern. I'll be okay. If it makes you feel better, I can text you when I get home. I'd hate to impose. It's no problem. Nodding, I gathered my purse and left the station. I went home, scrolled on my phone to James's socials. They were full of the same misogynistic speeches, hunting pictures, and the Confederate flag. But the photo of his truck and plate were in plain view. At sunset, I placed the spirit board on the middle of my altar and lit a black and red candle. Holding the planchette in my hands, I called Lily's name. It trembled as Hit floated to hello. "Lily, is this you?" I asked, my heart beating rapidly. "Yes." "Was James the one that killed you?" "Yes." My rage surged. "We got him." I gave the police his plate number. He's going to go away for a long time. NOTGOODENOUGH. Not enough? I'm doing all that I can. What more do you want? DEATHPAINHELL. I hope he gets the death penalty. He needs to suffer. The planchette jumped in my hands once again. YOUCURSEHIM. I was a practicing witch, but I didn't curse people. Then again, I didn't need to curse anyone up until now. The murder of my best friend seemed a justified reason enough to. My kitchen started to shake, and cabinet drawers opened and slammed shut. The air grew so cold I could see my breath in front of me, and at my feet there was my phone and a mason jar. Shaking, I picked them both up. I wasn't practiced in curses, but this was a place to start. Lighting some black candles and dragon's blood incense, my bedroom was filled with a soft glow and the scent of resin, wax, and roses. I wrote the name James Martin Will Suffer on a sticky note. Then I crossed out the vowels and repeating letters. Taking the remaining letters, I rearranged them into a cryptic glyph. Folding up the sigil, spat on it in the mason jar, and covered it with dirt before sealing the lid. I drove to a nearby river. In the past, I had volunteered and cleaned litter from its shores. I collected rocks from her banks. River spirit, I need your help. Take this jar and run its namesake to the bottom. May your water fill his breath, and may my sister have her vengeance, by the name of Hecate and Morrigan. The river carried it before bashing it into a boulder, breaking the jar into sharp shards before whisking it downstream. I prayed that the bastard would meet his end. Lily would pound on my walls every night and move my furniture. I went back to the spirit board asking if there was anything she wanted, but it was the same message every time. The grief and lack of sleep were affecting my job. My boss told me to take some leave and provided me the number to a grief counselor. When I was younger, I used to bury myself in work to avoid pain, but now it only left me exhausted. I felt brittle, as though my whole world was breaking around me. I would give my testimony, and along with the evidence, James would be sentenced to death. My job was done. The curse was only an accelerant for the inevitable. Except the trial would never come. I went back to the police office and asked for Officer Thompson. "Ms. Williams," said the detective. "Are you all right? You seem tired." Have you heard anything from James Martin?" Thompson looked back and forth. "I think you should come into my office. I'll get you some coffee." "Thank you," I said, as he led me back to a small, stuffy room shaded by blinds. "I'm technically not supposed to discuss this with civilians, but I know you were her friend. James volunteered his vehicle. The tire tracks don't match, and he has a fairly solid alibi. He was helping some family move some equipment. With his truck. Yes, his truck was out, that's why we don't have a lead." "Did Lily have anyone else? Like anyone that was giving her the creeps, maybe on social media?" "No. Her and James were constantly fighting. She never told me about anyone else. I'm sorry." "Ma'am, I promise you, we'll do everything we can. We're talking to her family. We'll let you know if anything changes if you do the same." I felt completely numb as I got into my car, as though I were on another plane of existence, slowly fading away. Rage welled up inside me, but not at the kindly old officer. He was just doing the best he could. James planned this out and dragged an innocent woman to death where no one could hear her scream. I needed to find proof. My phone vibrated with a text from an unregistered number. "I know who you are. They won't find your body." My heart froze in my chest as I looked for the number, but the message had disappeared. Fear burned into rage. The bastard wouldn't get away with this. I visited James's once for a New Year's Eve party, before he forbade Lily from talking to me. He lived on a farm with his parents, but in a separate house. I parked my car in a field at the far end of his property and passed through a wooded area with a sharp ravine. Clambering down the steep path, I crossed a wooden bridge over the river. The babble of the water over the stones calmed my jumpy nerves. Climbing up the steep slope, I followed the path out of the woods. The estate loomed in the distance. Rather than taking the dirt road, I walked through the pasture. A few sleepy cows walked past me, unbothered by my presence. Reaching the estate, I made my way to the enormous garage. The door was locked tight. The wind blew heavily against the garage, so heavy I had to brace myself. I ducked behind the structure as James walked out the door. Cursing under his breath, he opened the door to the garage. In the corner loomed a stack of tires lying next to a chain. The image of Lily being dragged down the dirt road flashed through my mind, and her screams made my flesh break out in a cold sweat. A ringing cell phone broke the silence. "Hello?" said James over the phone. James's face fell. His skin paled as he ran back into the house. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the evidence just as James screamed as I took off running as fast as my legs would carry me. My lungs burned from the cold air as he was gained on me. My legs buckled under me as I made my way through the woods towards the ravine. The river churning beneath me. Turning around to face him, his eyes wide with surprise. "Why are you trespassing on my property, Candy?" The words caught in my throat. I was too scared to say anything as he inched towards me. "Now, you're going to be a good girl and give me your phone." "Or what? Why do you want my phone? If you have an alibi, you have nothing to worry about." His eyes went blank. "What I did to Lily will be nothing compared to what I'll do to you. Death, pain, hell." The words flashed through my mind. I listened to the river beneath me. James lunged towards me, but I caught him off balance. He fell sharply down the ravine, landing on a large rock in the river, his bones poking through his shattered leg as he screamed in pain. "Help!" Smiling, I looked into his pleading eyes before pushing him into the current. Not enough to sweep him away, but enough to drag the broken limb. His screams were exquisite as buzzards began to circle overhead. The drive home was peaceful, and I felt heavy and drowsy. For the last time, I rested my hands on the planchette as it drifted towards goodbye. If you felt a shiver just now, brace yourself or next tale will leave you frozen. I'd been searching for a job for what felt like an eternity. My savings were dwindling, and I was starting to lose hope. So when I received a call from a prestigious company inviting me for an interview, I jumped at the opportunity. The voice on the phone was smooth and professional, and I felt a surge of excitement as I jotted down the address and time of the interview. The company was called Eclipse Enterprises, and I'd never heard of it before. But the website looked impressive, with sleek graphics and a mission statement that sounded like it was written by a team of highly paid consultants. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as I imagined myself working for such a respected company. The day of the interview arrived, and I woke up feeling like a kid on Christmas morning. I spent hours getting ready, carefully selecting my outfit and rehearsing my responses to common interview questions. As I headed out the door, I felt confident and prepared. The office building was located in a nondescript part of town, surrounded by rows of identical glass towers. I arrived early, and as I stepped into the lobby, I was greeted by a receptionist who looked like she'd just been plucked from a Tim Burton film. Her skin was pale and wan, and her eyes seemed to be sucking all the light out of the room. "Welcome to Eclipse Enterprises," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You must be here for the interview." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. There was something about the receptionist that didn't seem quite right. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be staring right through me, or the way her smile seemed to be hiding something. "Please, follow me," she said, her eyes glinting with an otherworldly intensity. I trailed behind her, my eyes scanning the empty corridors. Where was everyone? I had expected a bustling office, not this eerie silence. The air seemed to vibrate with an unsettling energy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. We stopped in front of a door with a small plaque that read, "Interview Room." The receptionist pushed the door open and gestured for me to enter. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the starkness of the room. A single chair sat in the center, facing a large metal desk, and behind the desk, a lone figure waited. He was a tall, gaunt man, with eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. His smile was wide and toothy, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome," he said, his voice dripping with an unsettling enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you could make it. Please, have a seat." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn and run, but my desire for the job kept me rooted to the spot. I sat down, trying to compose myself. The man began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rapid-fire sequence. I tried to follow, but my mind struggled to keep up. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He asked me questions about my qualifications, my experience, and my goals, but there was something about the way he asked them that made me feel like I was being interrogated. His eyes seemed to be boring into my soul, searching for something hidden deep within. I tried to answer his questions as confidently as I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. The man's intensity was unnerving, and I found myself growing more and more agitated by the minute. Suddenly, I felt a creeping sense of dread. I needed to get out of there, and fast. I tried to think of an excuse, but my mind was a blank. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, "but I just realized I left my phone in the car. May I step outside for a moment?" The man's smile faltered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, something dark and malevolent. But then his smile returned, wider and more toothy than before. "Of course," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please, take all the time you need." I leapt from the chair, my heart racing. As I turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. The receptionist stood in the doorway, her eyes black as coal and her skin gray as the stone. She was changing. Her body was contorting, twisting into impossible shape. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What was happening? What kind of place was this? And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing. The room was empty, the chair and desk gone. The door was open, and I stumbled out into the bright sunlight. As I looked back at the building, I realized that it was abandoned, the windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. I stumbled away, my mind reeling with questions. What had just happened? Was it all some kind of twisted dream? As I walked, I noticed that my feet felt heavy, as if they were stuck to the ground. I looked down and saw that my shoes were covered in a thick black substance that seemed to be seeping up from the ground. I tried to shake it off, but it only seemed to spread, creeping up my legs and onto my skin. I felt a creeping sense of dread as I realized that I was being pulled back to the building, back to the horrors that lurked within. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead, and I stumbled and fell. As I looked up, I saw the receptionist standing over me, her eyes black as coal, and her skin gray as the stone. She reached out a hand and touched my face, and I felt a wave of darkness wash over me. I was being pulled back to the abyss, back to the horrors that lurked within. But then, something inside me snapped. I remembered the words of a wise old man I had once met, who had told me that the only way to escape the darkness was to face it head-on. With newfound determination, I pushed myself up from the ground and faced the receptionist. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I will not be pulled back. I will not be consumed." As I spoke, the black substance that had been seeping up from the ground began to recede, and I felt my legs grow strong once more. I took a step back, and then another, and another, until I was running. running as fast as I could away from the building, away from the horrors that lurked within. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, until I was sure that I had left the darkness behind. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unblinking eyes were trained on me, waiting for me to let my guard down. But I knew that I had escaped, that I had faced the darkness and come out on top. And with that knowledge, I walked on into the bright sunlight, ready to face whatever lay ahead. What you've heard so far was only the beginning. The real terror lies ahead. Eamon allowed me to keep some extra paper today. He demanded I draw a picture of Neil Armstrong and him on the moon together. He says if it's not good, he's going to gouge out my eye. He probably didn't mean it. At least, the 8-year-old part of him didn't. But that wicked thing sharing his skin like an ill-fitting suit, that part never makes empty threat. The drawing's finished now. I have maybe 2 hours before he slips away before school, and those small feet pad down the concrete step. 2 hours to write this, to fold it small and slip it behind the loose brick near my cot. 2 hours to explain why I know with absolute certainty that one day Eamon will kill me. I'll begin at the start. Eamon joined my 3rd grade class halfway through the school year. I had been taken aside by Misha, the admissions officer, the previous day. A young boy will be joining your class tomorrow, she told me in hushed tones after ushering me into an empty hallway. There's a few things you should know. The few things turned out to be a nightmare, dressed as a police report. 3 months ago, a barefoot child had been caught ransacking the Quiet Dell service station, cramming potato chips into his mouth with mechanical desperation. He was rail-thin, fever-hot but ghost-pale, his face hollow where baby fat should have been. A service station attendant had to stop him from ripping open potato chip bags at will, cramming his face with funyuns until his cheeks were bulging. The police were called, who spent the better part of 3 hours trying to get Amon to talk. No dice, Amon doesn't talk unless he wants to. It was an elderly woman who finally identified him. She'd seen him in the park with his mother, always after dark, always alone. Her voice shook as she gave the address, and she never once looked at the boy. Not once. I live on the same street, the lady explained tremulously. 8 Sycamore Circuit, behind the caravan park. The police bought him an ice cream which melted untouched in his grip hand, drove him to 8 Sycamore Circuit. The house was a dying Georgian, its weatherboard showing through peeling paint like exposed bone. Drought-killed grass hosted a graveyard of mud-caked toys and garbage. Now, Quiet Dell's no stranger to poverty, and these officers had returned plenty of children to less than ideal homes. The foster system was overwhelmed, and the few available families had reputations that made even condemned houses look appealing. So they stuck around and knocked for longer than they otherwise might have, and one constable skirted around the back of the house to peer through the kitchen window. That's when they found Eamon's mother, Miss dead, Misha explained, trying her best to look somber, but unable to hide that small-town thrill at the opportunity to go halfway out the kitchen like she'd been running from something. I've met her before, you know. Quiet, tiny little thing. Anyway, she was all smashed up. Chest opened right up, ribcage wide open, all her guts pulled out but still attached. And this is the sick part, she was missing her heart. Maybe she picked up on the fact I was finding the relish in her voice distasteful, because Misha quickly added, "Anyway, it's been a few months and they reckon he's stable enough to join the other students. He's a bit quiet, I'm sure you can imagine. Maybe sit him up the back." On his first day, Eamon wore a second-hand uniform that hung off him like a deflated balloon. He had this strange way of walking. His head remained completely level and glided more than walked. When I introduced him to the class, 23 pairs of eyes fixed on him with the intense curiosity only 3rd graders can muster. Eamon stared back, unblinking, until one by one the children looked away. By recess, they were already whispering. Lily Martinez told me Eamon had stood perfectly still for the entire break, watching them play. He was counting, she said, tugging at her braids. Every time someone touched someone else, like tag or high fives, he was keeping score. Tommy Reeves swore Eamon had followed him to the back. Standing outside the stall, breathing so quietly, Tommy thought he'd left, until he opened the door to find Eamon inches from his face. But I'd seen this before. My little brother Lucas had been different to brilliant, but unable to grasp the invisible rules that governed childhood friendship. I'd watched him stand alone at recess, memorizing playground patterns instead of joining in. The other kids had called him creepy too. So when I caught Eamon lingering after art class, studying my demonstration porcupine with its popsicle stick quills and crayon details, I saw an opportunity. His focus was intense, head tilted at an odd angle as he traced each line with his eye. "Would you like to show me what you drew?" He turned to me with that unnervingly steady gaze. After a long moment, he retrieved his paper from his desk, holding it out with both hands like an offering. The drawing made my throat close up. Dark circles peppered the page like open wounds, each one meticulously shaded. They looked less like holes and more like mouths, descending into somewhere lightless. Between them, twisted figures writhed in positions that shouldn't have been possible. In the center, a small figure was bound in heavy chains. "Who is this?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Me," said Amon. His dark eyes bore into me, as though measuring my reaction. "Why did you draw yourself like this?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Because that's what Mom did," he replied. "Oh, Eamon, that's horrible," I said. I was no better than Misha. Curiosity bubbled on my tongue. "Do you know why she did this?" "To keep the wicked in." My heart broke for him. Here was a traumatized child, acting out through art the horrors he'd endured. I knelt down to his level and took his hands in my own. I remember jerking slightly at how hot his palms were, like he'd been warming them in front of a fire. "I know," I told him quietly, "that you had a tough time before you came here. But I want you to know, it wasn't your fault, okay? And as long as I'm here, you'll always have a friend you can talk to." Then Amon's arms wrapped around my waist with crushing force. His face pressed into my stomach, and I felt him inhale deeply, like he was trying to memorize my scent. He hung on too long, too tight, like he was trying to emulate an embrace he'd never actually experienced. I remember thinking he was an odd kid at that moment, but a kid nonetheless, and my heart ached for him. Should have thrown him out the goddamn window. "You're not like her," he whispered into my shirt. "You're good. You'll be better." I patted his head awkwardly, trying to ignore how his fingers dug into my back like he was afraid I'd disappear. When he finally let go, 10 perfect bruises were forming on my skin. The first incident happened during spelling bee practice. Sarah Chen had just correctly spelled necessary, and I gave her a stamp on the back of her hand as a little reward. I didn't notice Amon's reaction not then, but during recess, Sarah came to me absolutely hysterical, friends surrounding her with wide eyes and pale faces. She'd wrapped a scarf around her hand, the blood staining cornflower blue cotton a deep purple. After enough coaxing, she agreed to show me. All my insides froze. "He said I had to get it off," she hiccuped. So he held my hand against the brick wall and kept scrubbing until the star was gone. When I confronted him, Eamon just stared at me with those unnervingly steady eyes. "Then why did you give it?" he asked. "If you knew it would upset me." He was suspended for 3 days, but he'd had a brutal upbringing. He was just a child. Sarah Chen's parents were surprisingly lenient. They left it at that. No counseling, no behavioral checks or special support, nothing. After that, the other children learned to reject my rewards if Amon was watching. They'd shake their heads quickly, eyes down, mumbling, "No thank you," before hurrying back to their seats. But it wasn't just about stamps anymore. A week later, Tommy Reeves made the mistake of asking me for help with his math during lunch break. I found him an hour later locked in the supply closet, a crude message scratched into his arm with a pencil. "Miss Tilly is busy." When his parents threatened to press charges, Tommy changed his story, said he did it to himself. He switched schools the next week. Lily Martinez brought me an apple one morning. Her family had an orchard, and she was always sharing the harvest. By afternoon, she was in the nurse's office with stomach cramps. They found pieces of glass in her lunch bag, mixed in with her sliced fruit, tiny, methodical fragments that could only have been placed there deliberately. His attachment grew stronger. He'd wait by my car each morning, though his foster family dropped him off an hour before school started. He began leaving drawings on my desk, endearing ones at first, of us together in various settings. But they warped over time. In some, we were underground in candle-lit rooms. In others, we were alone in the world. Everyone else just shadowy figures in the background. When I hung other students' artwork, he'd scratch their names off, replacing them with his own. I was grateful when Michael suggested dinner, a chance to pretend everything was normal, to focus on something other than Eamon's increasingly possessive behavior. Michael looked handsome in his police uniform, fresh off his shift. Being with him felt safe. About 4 glasses of wine in, I started to tell him about Eamon's behavior, about the injured children and the drawings. Looking back, I was unsettled but not terrified. He was little more than a child after all, lonely and damaged. Maybe if I'd taken the glaringly clear signs at face value, I wouldn't be here today. Michael let me finish, then leaned across the table. Listen, there's something you need to know about Eamon's mother. He glanced around the restaurant before continuing. You remember that cult? They got compounds all over America, Phoenix, Utah, hell, just down the road in Driftwood. The Brides of Christendom, I said immediately. Of course I knew. They were notorious. Members came knocking on my front door at least once a month. Well, continued Michael, she was a runaway. You're kidding. Nope, said Michael, leaning back in his chair and grinning, pleased by my surprise. And she might have gotten away, but a lot of that shit stuck around. I guess she couldn't quite shake whatever she went through in that cult. Lorraine Hutton was one sick lady. What do you mean? He leaned across the table, voice low. There was a room, in the basement. We found journals. She documented everything. Detailed logs of the treatments she would put him on through. I swallowed. Do I want to know? You don't, but I'm telling you anyway. She'd chain him up to this metal chair custom made, child size. She'd leave him shackled there for days, reciting biblical verses. Latin exorcist type stuff. She counted his calories too. They were way too low. I swear to God, it was like she was challenging herself to see how low she could go without killing the boy. We also found prayer boards studded with nails, and she'd make him kneel on them. I covered my mouth. Oh my God. It gets worse, he continued grimly. We found this device. He trailed off, looking past me. I turned. Eamon stood at our table, perfectly still in a too large dress shirt, his foster family hovering uncertainly behind him. The change in temperature was immediate to not supernatural, but the kind of cold that comes from pure, concentrated rage. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Michael tried to smile. Hey buddy, how are? My mother used to pray too. Eamon interrupted softly. Still staring at Michael with such open loathing, I was surprised his face didn't melt off. Right until the end, even when I was pulling things out of her. Amon, I said sharply. Don't joke like that. Are you fucking him? Amon demanded heatedly, jerking his pale head at Michael. Eamon, cried his foster mother, a vaguely familiar woman named Anne. Serial foster mother, in it for the checks. A couple of my kids had lived under her roof, as they never quite lost that hungry, stray dog look about them. Anne placed a beefy hand on Eamon's shoulder and shot me a look of extreme mortification. I'm so sorry, she said. He's doing much better these days, but sometimes. Let's go, Eamon, come on. We'll order you something nice. She steered him away, and Eamon went willingly, though he continued to stare back at us over his shoulder. Before I could process everything, a small voice piped up beside me. The foster family's youngest daughter had lingered behind, twisting her pigtail nervously. Are you Miss Tilly? She whispered. Yes, I am. You're Amon's mom? I blinked. No, I'm not. Oh, she hesitated. He says you are. You should be careful. He didn't like his last mommy. That night I woke suddenly. I wasn't sure why at first. The house was silent except for the autumn wind rattling branches against the windows. Michael lay on his side beside me, his steady breath a familiar rattle. Something felt wrong. You know that feeling when your hindbrain recognizes danger before your conscious mind catches up? That primal instinct that makes your skin prickle and your mouth go dry? I lay there in the dark, debating whether to wake Michael. Told myself I was being ridiculous. I was on edge. Then I thought I heard footsteps. Now, our old Victorian house was infamous for its eerie creaks and groans. It was like living inside the intestinal tract of some great creature. I'd been living there so long, my palms no longer welled with sweat, and my mind didn't automatically jump to dark shadows in corners and eyeless women hiding under my bed. But those steps sounded so clear. Being crazy, I told myself. The stairs creaked as I made my way downstairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. Each step felt like a mile. The living room was bathed in strange shadows from the streetlight outside, making familiar furniture look twisted and foreign. Wind howled through the ancient ventilation system, creating sounds almost like whispers. I followed their chatter through the empty kitchen, the cavernous living room, and came to a stop in the moonlit hallway. The front door stood wide open, autumn leaves scattered across the welcome mat. My heart thundered in my chest as I approached it. Just the wind, I told myself. The house was built in '52, and the door latch had always been temperamental. Still, my hand shook as I pushed it closed, twisting the deadbolt with perhaps more force than necessary. The walk back upstairs felt longer, darker. I found myself checking over my shoulder every few steps, though I couldn't say why. When I finally reached the familiar darkness of our bedroom, relief flooded through me. Michael was still and exactly as I'd left him, one hand tucked under his pillow, no longer snoring, thank God. I settled beside him with a shaky little laugh, then felt something hot and wet against the back of my neck. I froze, hand inching toward the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room. I screamed. The sheets were soaked crimson, spreading outward from Michael's chest like a blooming flower. Where his sternum should have been was a ragged cavity, hollow and dark. And there, sitting on my pillowcase, still warm and dripping, was his heart. Beneath my guttural screams, I heard admission officer Misha's voice like a distant echo in my head. And this is the sick part, she'd told me. She was missing her heart. I spent that night in the police station, Michael's blood drying in the creases of my hands, my clothes under my fingernails. They'd given up trying to get me to change out of my nightgown. My voice was hoarse from screaming, but I couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop trying to make them understand. You don't understand, I kept saying, rocking back and forth. You didn't see him with the other children. The things he'd do when someone got too close to me. The detective shook his head. Miss Tilly, the damage done to your husband's body, it was extensive, brutal. We're talking about injuries that would require significant physical strength. No child could have. No matter what I said, I could not convince them. Michael's murder remains unsolved to this day. 2 months passed in a haze of police interviews and sleepless nights. I hadn't stepped foot in the school since Michael's death, couldn't bear to face those tiny desks and cheerful wall displays. But Quietdale was a small town with limited options, and Michael's life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. Bills kept arriving with mechanical persistence, each one a ticking reminder that I couldn't avoid reality forever. I slept in the living room now, on a worn couch facing the TV. The stairs leading to our bedroom might as well have been a mountain. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring up into that darkness, remembering the wet warmth of Michael's blood, until my throat closed up and I had to turn away. The job search was futile. Quietdale's economy consisted of the school, a grocery store, and a handful of family-run businesses that had been passed down for generations. After the third rejection, I knew what I had to do. The house needed work before I could sell it new carpets upstairs, fresh paint to cover the memory sand that meant money, which meant returning to school. The administration was sympathetic, almost embarrassingly so. They agreed to let me finish out the school year, accepted my resignation effective June, and promised I wouldn't have to teach Eamon. He's in Mrs. Peterson's class now. The principal assured me, "You won't have to interact with him at all." I'd expected to see a monster when I finally encountered him in the hallway, some hint of the darkness I was certain lurked behind those eyes. Instead, he barely glanced my way, absorbed in conversation with two other boys. He looked normal, happy even. The doubt crept in slowly, poisonous. Had grief warped my memories, made me imagine impossible things? The months crawled by. My students seemed subdued, maybe, their usual exuberance dimmed, but not the reign of terror I had seen in those earlier months. On multiple occasions, I spotted Eamon out on the playground, playing boisterously with boys his own age. He would regularly pass me in the corridor, shoot me a quick, "Hey, Miss Tilly," before bounding after his friends. I began to question myself. I was torn between a gut-deep belief that something was intrinsically wrong with the gaunt little boy with the dead cultist mother, and a sense of self-admonishment that I had possibly blamed a completely innocent 8-year-old boy for the death of my boyfriend. On my last day, my students brought flowers, bright bouquets of dandelions and wild daisies, grocery store carnations clutched in sweaty hands. My desk disappeared under the offerings, a farewell shrine of childhood affection. Then Eamon appeared in my doorway during lunch break, a piece of paper held carefully in both hands. "I made this for you," he said, the first words he'd spoken to me in 6 months. The drawing showed two figures sitting close together in what looked like a basement or cellar, surrounded by strange shapes I couldn't quite make out. We were both smiling, my arm around his shoulders. The longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. Like staring at your own reflection too long until it becomes a stranger's face. "Thank you, Amen," I said as a parting offering. Whatever. I was leaving Quiet Dell, and I was never looking back. The moving company had come the previous day. The house had sold quickly, below market value, but I didn't care. My college roommate had offered her spare room until I got back on my feet, a lifeline I grabbed with both hands. I couldn't spend another night in this town. I returned just long enough to pick up my old convertible, stuffed with what little belongings I'd deemed worth saving, and took bitter pleasure watching the "Welcome to Quiet Dell" sign shrink on the horizon as I left it behind. The roads were empty as I drove out of Quiet Dell, my headlights cutting through the darkness. My phone's GPS promised 8 hours to Monica's house. I could make it by sunrise if I pushed through. The trees pressed close to the road, their shadows making strange patterns in the high beams. Then a small figure stepped into the road, and my world turned sideways. I yanked the wheel hard, tires screaming against asphalt. The world spun in lazy circles through my windshield, trees, road, sky, trees again before ending in a violent crunch of metal and glass. Pain bloomed across my chest where the seatbelt caught me, and something warm trickled down my face. Through the spiderweb of my shattered windshield, I saw him approaching. The headlights caught his small frame, casting long shadows behind him that seemed to writhe and twist with each step. My head was spinning, vision blurring at the edges, but I could see his smile clearly, too wide, too knowing. He appeared at my window, pressing one small hand against the cracked glass. The shadows behind him grew darker, larger, consuming the weak light of my ruined headlights. "It's okay, Miss Tilly," he whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "We're going to be a family now." The darkness swallowed me whole. I came to with the taste of copper in my mouth and cold cement against my cheek. The room was large, windowless, filled with shapes that resolved slowly into terrible clarity chains hanging from ceiling hooks, tables with restraints, things I couldn't name, but whose purpose was written in their sharp edges and cruel curves. A child's drawing come to life. "You're awake," Eamon's voice, bright with genuine joy. He knelt beside me, reaching out to brush hair from my face with gentle fingers. I was worried I'd hurt you too badly, but I was careful. I've gotten better at being careful. Why? My voice cracked on the word. Because you're going to be my new mom, he said, as if it were obvious. My last mom taught me wrong. She thought the machines could keep the bad parts locked away, but they just made them stronger. But you're different. You understand me. And if you're good, if you really love me, I won't have to hurt anyone else. Not my foster family, not the kids at school. They can all stay alive. The worst part was his sincerity. The desperate need for connection warring with something hungry and violent behind his eyes. I thought of Michael's chest, torn open like paper, of Ms. Hutton's missing heart, of all the small cruelties I'd witnessed and dismissed. Of course I'll be your mom, I whispered, and watched his face light up with terrible joy. Our days fell into a routine. He'd visit before school, bringing McDonald's breakfast or stolen Pop-Tarts, chattering about his classes while I ate. His foster family never questioned his absences, not after what happened to their rabbits. He'd spend hours after school curled against my side like any child seeking comfort, while I stroked his hair and told him stories and pretended this was normal, this was love. Sometimes he'd ask me to use the machines on him, his mother's legacy of pain and restraint. To keep the wicked parts quiet, he'd explain, tears in his eyes. I don't want to hurt you like I hurt her. She didn't understand, but you do. Right, Mom? I'd comply, telling myself it was survival, that each day I kept his attention focused on me was another day his classmates went home safe, another day his foster family's pet stayed alive, another day I might find a way out. But there were moments becoming more frequent when the mask would slip, when the thing wearing a child's face would look at me with eyes older than time, hungry for more than a mother's love. Those were the moments I understood what his real mother had tried to contain, what she'd died trying to control. I don't know how much longer I can keep him satisfied with this twisted domestic fantasy. How much longer before the creature wins over the child? I'm writing this down so someone will understand, will know what to look for if when I disappear like his mother did. Because Eamon is still growing, and his appetite grows with him. And you want to know the really worrying part? He tells me there are others just like him. I do not have much time left, but here is what you need to know. I work for a governmental department whose name would be meaningless to most people. We're not men in black, but we are certainly men and women working round the clock on projects that would send tax-paying citizens into a dizzy. We have no budget restrictions and no oversight beyond a handful of senior executives appointed directly by the Secretary of State. You won't know their names because they don't make the news. That is not an accident. I am neither a senior nor junior staff member in my organization, but I am well-liked and very competent. When someone or something goes wrong, I am usually called in. As well as speaking Russian and German, I also have a keen interest in Cold War history. I was given a pretty simple task: review Project Noah and make some notes on the successes of the project. What's Project Noah? Project Noah set about building 300 bunkers between 1952,000 and 1960. These bunkers extended right down the east coast of America and were designed to save lives if a nuclear war were to occur. Our bunkers were reinforced concrete with iodine-treated paint. Each bunker was a long vertical cylinder that extends downwards towards the earth. Each bunker could take 25 people. This meant that each bunker had a maximum capacity of 20 civilians, including necessary staff. Crucially, we placed each bunker beneath 55 meters of soil and dirt. So what was I reviewing exactly? Well, each bunker had a point caller, and each point caller had their own diaries. The bunker notes were the usual maintenance checks, routine training, or, on the rare occasion, an intruder found them. The point caller is best summarized via the handbook below. A point caller is someone who, via their connections in the White House WH, gets direct and immediate information about potential nuclear strikes on America. Their role involves making the call to the surrounding ticket holders of the bunker. Their call sounds the alarm that nuclear war is imminent, and all residents of the bunker must make immediate efforts to travel to the bunker. The call was known as the Doomsday Trumpet, see Revelation 9:1. The Bureau Executive directly appoints the point caller. Now, in retrospect, we are thankful, very thankful, that nuclear war did not occur. As a result, most point callers summarize their experiences as tense, but they never needed to pull the trigger on imminent nuclear war. Overall, war and violence never erupted on the east coast of America, although we had some close moments. I was to catalog and review the notes for any added details that we might be able to gain from the diaries. I reviewed 299 pointer caller diaries. What struck me was this. Between Bunker 256 and 258, there should have been a diary entry from Bunker 257. We were missing a diary from the point caller of B257. I was confused, but I did know this. When you work on projects, it's best to keep questions to yourself and find the answers first. All too often, you get the gray suit wall of intentional confusion, obstruction, and sometimes outright misinformation. It took me many hours in the depths of the Bureau's archive, but I was able to find a diary. Most of the diary appears ripped out, but there is some left. What proceeds is the last known details of Bunker 257. Diary entry 2. In 1962, the nation made a major decision. We, the people, confronted communism. We confronted tyranny. We confronted the Iron Curtain. On a more personal level, we sounded the alarm in southern Florida that a nuclear war was imminent. While the beatniks moseyed around to free love, or whatever they called it, we prepped for the possibility of WWE. Protocol had been in place for quite some time, but nothing can take away from the reality of war. You can plan as much as you like, but when you're staring nuclear weapons in the face, it's a whole different ballgame. You cannot sing your way out of fallout. Originally, I wanted OSS, but like many others, I was sent to the shores. Actually, I was sent flying into German-occupied France, somewhere around Sainte-Mère-Église. Unlike many others, I made it back. At the conclusion of the war, I and the entire world became cognizant of the existence of nuclear weapons. I joined the INR, the Bureau, to you in '61. Hillsman interviewed me personalu. I quickly rose up the ranks, and with the help of some old friends, I was able to position myself as a point caller, from lowly George Sobel to First Lieutenant Sobel. If the WH gets the nod, we get the nod. Simple as that. We're direct to the source. If you're telling people that they are about to be vaporized 25 minutes after the bombs have dropped, you've failed. Knowing full well the Reds had the car bomba, we made a decision that across the East Coast, bunkers would be built and sold to the highest bidders. Call it an insurance program if you prefer, but we were basically selling a future to families with who could afford a future worth preserving. The call would come through a dedicated phone that each family had. They would have also purchased their tickets well in advance. They looked like the C ration cans that got us in '41. Cynically, these were not the best and brightest of America either. Most were finance, business, and property millionaires who managed to make some decent money during the war. If I had my way, veterans would have been first in line, but that was well above my pay grade at the Bureau. If you were a senior employee and worked on the crucial maintenance, provided high-level intelligence, or were on the committee, then you were assigned a room. As a result, I had a bunker room. I'm not married, have no direct family members, and no real life outside my job. As point caller, I lived beside Bunker 257, and I operated a basic job through my home. This all allowed me to fit in easily with the neighbors, albeit I was known to be shy. Importantly, it also allowed me to be ready to move at the drop of a hat. I fit the bill as point caller of B257. Antsville could worry about themselves because we were made in the shade. Then it happened. On that fateful day, after getting the call to make the call, I made the call. I got a call from Shortmouth, my contact in the WH, and he made it clear. The Soviets' nukes were launched by state-of-the-art submarines and not from the mainland. With that, we had even less time than I thought. When I made the call, it wasn't long before a convoy of cars, not the Impalas, Lincolns, and Fords I expected, but beat-up greasers, came spinning down the dirt road, only to be abandoned as if they were already radioactive. The bunker door is modest in size and meant to blend with the natural scenery. If you don't know where it is, the likelihood of finding it by accident is rare. We have a clear policy for any man left behind. If you were not present and accounted for within 35 minutes, we shut the bunker doors. Isn't that a bite? Still, that's about 8 minutes more than I would have liked. Don't believe me? You should go and ask Herb York. This is where I made my first and only error. In my haste, I did not set the lockdown time for the mandatory 9-day cooldown, but rather 9 years. I swear I had 9 days in place originally. Yes, I know. I was certain that I did it right, but I was also unable to override the timer, because my second-in-command, Second Lieutenant James Winters, did not make to the bunker in time. Lucky him. Here's the gut punch. We are truly silos. When the Bureau explained this, they made the point that the risk of cross-contamination was too high. All it took was a single commie or dissident to uproot the bunkers, and the whole program would have got the royal shaft. I understood this at the time, and when explained, I stupidly agreed. My fear of the Reds overpowered my common sense. We did have a radio. It's been almost 8 days since JFK and Khrushchev talked each other down from the brink of war. Cuba's waters had calmed, and America, the Soviets, and the entire world unclenched their fists. If anything, there was celebration above ground. I am grateful. Truly, I am. Part of me selfishly prayed that war would occur. I would have justified my actions by my incredible foresight. But as we crowded around the only radio in the bunker, I imagined our president proudly addressing the nation from the Oval Office. I briefly smiled. I watched families pack their bags, move themselves towards the exit, and stare at the countdown timer for the reinforced bunker doors to open. While there was laughter, pats on the backs, and a few light-hearted jokes about a mandated vacation, they were worn and weary. I was still in my office, which overlooked the bunker door and entrance hall. The timer ticks to 0, and the doors do not budge. A new timer flashes up. 9 years. Well, 9 years minus 9 days. Smiles and laughter turned to shouts and screams. The radio was futile. No one was answering. No matter the constant shouting and screaming, all radio waves were silent. There is a short staircase leading to my office. On the staircase, I placed furniture between them and me. Futile, but it gave me a small sense of control over the situation. The door is locked. I won't be able to tell you the rest of this story as I hear the rush of bodies towards my staircase. While I know that we do not have food for everyone here, I have just enough ammunition for the first few. Call me Bogart, but this is now me versus them. In 1956, Khrushchev's "We was Pakaranim" was ingrained into the psyche of the American mind. As I hear their bodies bounce against the office door, I can't help but think that in the end I did all the work for him. End of diary entry 2. I was aghast. Not only were 25 people condemned, but his diary was clearly found, catalogued, and reviewed. Why then would someone be so eager to deny the families and friends this closure? As I placed the document back onto the shelf, an abrupt cough notified me to another presence. B? 257, is it? I gazed at an elderly man in his 90s. He was not in uniform, but I gave the salute in confidence that he was at one point. He returned the salute. I nearly forgot to answer him. Yes, it appears so. B. 257. How has this not been brought into public disclosure? He smiled. Well, we don't make mistakes here. I perhaps owe my life to that man. He walked slowly over and thumbed the back of the binder. He leafed through the pages, landing on Winters. I have to explain. First Lieutenant Winters was not a bad guy by any means. In fact, he was a lot better than I was. That's probably the reason they picked him and not me. I was puzzled. The families, known Soviet agents, known communist sympathizers, known peaceniks. Look, they were a lot more trouble than you would have thought. They weren't billionaires or millionaires as we had Sobel believe. They were union workers, factory leaders, and in some cases budding revolutionaries. Funny, you would think they would be more discerning. But when liquidation is your only other option, the government is your best friend. You don't really believe that the 9-day or 9-year or whatever you set it at cannot be overruled, do you? That would be a bit of an oversight. And guess what? We have a lot of oversight. I was still trying to parse more information out of this disarmingly forthright man. How do you know all this? I know this because I wasn't late. I never intended on showing up. Look, son, you try to get the Kennedys or the Johnsons or whoever to sign off on 25 people. Some of them were pretty high up as well. That's just not going to happen, is it? We needed a place for them. We needed it fast, and we needed it during a time of crisis. When the whole world is looking left, we're going right. It dawned on me. Second Lieutenant Winters? That's major to you, son. With that, he gave a wry wink. A wave of shock and anger swept over me. For almost 80 years, these people were sentenced to a bunker without a cause. Winters told me that the Bureau never made mistakes. Well, they might have done when they hired me. Look, here's the deal. He sighed. Food was meant to run out after 25 years. If I can do the math, so can you. Last month we received a message. How? Well, when we went to review all the bunkers, we reopened communication with each one. Obviously, most of them were empty. So nothing too surprising. But a few volunteers back in 1980 said they would do a stint, see how well the bunkers held up. We left bunker 258 alone because, frankly, it's already a grave. For a good 25,030 years, nothing, and then boom. He snapped his fingers. 3 words followed by 3 more. Not alone anymore. Send, help, priest. I was puzzled. Major Winters' eyes darkened. Another thing. Whatever is down there, it's big. We don't know much, but any attempt to make contact has sent our own men into a headspin. We have 3 off-duty from PTSD just by listening to the radio. Honestly, we have no idea what's down there. The doors have been internally reset to open. Whoever is in there wants to get out. I knew the next question. Will you go, Norm? And with that, I went forward to see who or what was still alive in Bunker 257. Subscribe for Part 2. You thought that was disturbing? This next story will leave you speechless. I've always wanted to be a mother. I remember when I was in kindergarten, all the kids were supposed to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most kids said things like firefighter, astronaut, doctor, cat doctor, etc. I said, Mother, my teacher, Miss Moss, told me I could be a mother as well as something else, and urged me to pick another dream job. I honestly couldn't think of one, but because all the other kids were staring at me, I blurted out, Teacher. That made Miss Moss smile, but it made me feel bad because I knew I was lying to her. I've always hated lying to people. That's why I am going to tell you the truth. I promise. I always knew I was going to be a mother, but never in a million years could I ever have imagined I'd have a daughter like Freya. When was in my teens, I got my first serious boyfriend, Jack. I started birth control because I knew it was the responsible thing to do. Logically, I knew I wasn't ready to be a mother, but I still couldn't help the feeling of despair that washed over me each time I swallowed another pill. Emotionally, it felt so wrong, putting this barrier between myself and my longest-held dream. Sometimes I'd even cry. These feelings became especially acute when Jack and I decided to get married. I wanted to start our family immediately, but Jack wanted us to finish university and get settled in our careers before talking about kids. I agreed. That was the logical thing to do. I kept swallowing those pills while pouring my longing into journals. I'd make lists of baby names and dream about who my child would grow up to be. Would they want to be a doctor? Or perhaps an investigative journalist? Maybe their greatest desire would be to be a parent, like me. I followed mommy bloggers online, memorizing their tips and tricks so I'd be ready to be the best mom ever, simultaneously wondering if my family would be as perfect as theirs. But I honestly wasn't looking for perfection. I just wanted to have a happy kid who would feel loved as their unique self. I knew whoever arrived, I was ready to love them to the stars and back. I was going to be the best mom. I knew I would be. Finally, Jack and I were ready to start our family. But it turned out harder than I had expected. Much harder. Months turned into years, and every negative test hit like a knockout punch. It never got easier. It probably didn't help that I was still following those perfect mommy bloggers with their perfect families. So I started following others who were sharing about their fertility journeys, people who were struggling as much as me. That helped me start sharing my own experiences. It felt so good knowing that I wasn't alone. It felt like being a part of this amazing community of people I had never met. Each time a fellow struggler finally found success, we all congratulated them joyfully. But alone, with Jack, I'd cry. I was tired of waiting for my turn. I know this wasn't only taking a toll on me. Jack was struggling too. One day, while I was crying in his arms, he asked me, if we aren't able to have kids, would a life with just the two of us be so bad? My silence was enough for us both to understand my answer to that. Jack and I decided to use all of our savings to try IVF. The process was tough emotionally and physically. Injections, ultrasounds, waiting. But it all felt worth it to me. Then, finally, it happened. I was pregnant. The world finally felt like it made sense to me. Jack and I were overjoyed. I felt like I was walking on fluffy white clouds. That was before I knew what was coming. TW child loss. We found out I was carrying a boy. We named him Oliver. But then, during a routine ultrasound, everything changed. The technician's silence and the doctor's grave expression told us what we didn't want to hear. Something was wrong. Those fluffy white clouds I had been walking on, they became dark storm clouds that surrounded me for the rest of the pregnancy. We knew our son wasn't going to live long after his birth. In the end, one day was all we got with our perfect boy. I loved him to the stars and back, and I still do. I just wish I could have done something more to give him more time. I couldn't help but feel I had failed him as a mother. The next days, weeks, months, passed in a haze of grief so heavy, I didn't know how we'd survive it. The nursery we'd so joyfully prepared now felt like a cruel joke. Silence felt deafening, and any noise was the wrong noise. I'd like to say that our relationship grew stronger through our shared grief, but it didn't. I wanted to start trying for another baby. I thought it would help us step forward out of the darkness we had felt trapped in. I thought it would be good for us to have something to look forward to. But Jack said he wasn't ready. He said we had to build back up our savings. It didn't take me long to get him to admit that, actually, the main reason was that he was scared about having another sick child. Jack packed his bag to stay at a hotel for a night. He said he just needed a bit of space. He never moved back. Somehow, in the midst of all this, I found myself back online, sharing my story. The responses poured in. Messages of love and shared pain. Messages I clung onto with desperation, as if each were a lifeline. I was in the bleakest part of my life, and those lifelines were essential. To make things even worse, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage, so had to list our house for sale. I shared all of this to my followers. Now I wonder, if I'd never shared anything online, would my daughter even exist? I think it was because I shared my story that the New Genesis Institute found me. Maybe Dr. Hart did personally read my posts. Or maybe an algorithm pointed them towards who they were looking for. A desperate woman who would give anything, do anything, for a child. I don't know how they found me. but I know that Freja wouldn't exist without them. It was early on a Sunday morning when I received this email. We are thrilled to extend to you an invitation to participate in an exclusive opportunity at the New Genesis Institute, a private fertility clinic dedicated to pioneering the future of human health and wellness. After learning about your fertility challenges and the heartbreaking loss you've endured, we believe you are uniquely positioned to benefit from and contribute to the groundbreaking work at the New Genesis Institute. Your journey has resonated deeply with Dr. Evelyn Hart, whose mission is not only to support those facing struggles, but also to advance the science of preventative medicine for future generations. To access your official invitation, please first sign the required NDA. There was a link to an NDA. I was nervous about clicking anything. It looked legit, but was this really some sort of horrible scam? By doing a quick search online, I learned that the New Genesis Institute was funded by Dr. Evelyn Hart, a billionaire philanthropist who had been funding health initiatives for years. There were hardly any photos of her. Dr. Hart appeared notorious for staying away from the public eye, but her name was credited on numerous scientific journals. She seemed super impressive. Hart had made her fortune early in her career when she innovated a disease testing device now used in clinics around the world. I suddenly felt something I hadn't in a long time: excitement and hope. My heart started to beat fast in my chest. I decided to take the leap. I clicked the NDA. Heart racing now, I skimmed an extensive document. Gleaning it was meant to ensure that any and all information about the Institute would remain strictly confidential. I signed it swiftly and pressed Submit. Then I was taken to my official invitation. I'll share it with you here, and yes, I do realize I am breaking my NDA, but I'm more than willing to risk all consequences to get this information out to everyone. Thank you for considering the New Genesis Institute. Founded by renowned Dr. Evelyn Hart, the New Genesis Institute is at the forefront of revolutionary research in preventative medicine, with a focus on creating healthier and stronger generations. We are conducting a series of elite fertility treatments designed not only to help women conceive, but to ensure that future children are born with optimal health to give them the best possible chance in life. Should you decide to take part in our program, you will receive personalized fertility treatments designed by Dr. Hart and her team, accommodation during your treatment and pregnancy at the New Genesis Institute, personalized health care for the duration of your participation, financial support for you and your child in the years of their development in exchange for participation in scheduled health monitoring for research purposes, the opportunity to contribute to a better future, ensuring that the next generation is equipped to thrive. This invitation is offered to a select few individuals and is fully funded by Dr. Hart's personal investment in the future of medicine. Your resilience and willingness to embrace new possibilities have made you an ideal candidate for our program. If you want to participate in our innovative fertility program, please RSVP at your earliest convenience. We look forward to the opportunity to welcome you to the New Genesis Institute. I stared at that letter for I don't know how long, reading it and rereading it and rereading it. Then suddenly, before I even realized I was making the decision, I was responding. Thank you so much for reaching out. Yes, I would love to participate. Their response came quickly. I received an email with detailed instructions. A private car would pick me up on March 1st, followed by a flight to their facility. The email explained that the New Genesis Institute was located on a private island, a place that, from the photos in the email, looked more like a resort than a clinic. Towering palm trees and sparkling blue water surrounded white buildings that gleamed in the sunlight. It didn't seem real, but then again, no part of this whole situation felt real. It didn't bother me at the time that I couldn't find the institute on a map. They had detailed extreme secrecy in the NDA. Instead of being nervous, I preferred to embrace a dream of a different reality that took me away from my current depressing existence. Plus, it was perfect timing. I was looking for a rental starting March 1st, and as accommodation was included during my stay at the institute, I wouldn't have to worry about that. All I had to do is move all my stuff to a storage unit and let my life take me where it was going to take me. I had spent so many years trying to achieve a specific plan. Giving over to this felt right to me, somehow. It felt like winning the lottery. I let that high feeling carry me to March 1st. When March 1st came, that was the first time I felt true fear. What if this was all a scam? Or worse, a joke? Was someone playing me? And if they were, why? But the car arrived precisely when it said it would. And it took me to an airport where I was welcomed onto a small plane. Apart from the crew, there were two other people on board, Claire and Mariah. I learned that they were also going to participate in Dr. Hart's treatment. On the flight, we got to know each other better. Claire and Mariah had very similar stories to my own. They both had trouble conceiving and didn't have the funds for any alternate route to motherhood. Claire was a widow, her husband died of cancer, and Mariah was recently single. Mariah also had a child who had passed away in infancy. Neither of them had any other children, but desperately wanted them. We were all so excited about being selected by Dr. Hart for her program. Claire and Mariah agreed that the whole thing didn't seem real. But, like me, they let their hope for a child lead their decision to make this epic leap of faith. The plane landed on a pristine airstrip. We were greeted by uniformed staff who smiled and greeted us as if they already knew us personally. An especially friendly staff member, Lark, took us under her wing. She escorted us towards the main building where we were told we'd be introduced to Dr. Hart. Touching my feet to that island, seeing those buildings, this is when things really started feeling real for me. The facility looked amazing. There were little cottages dotted around a larger main building. Lark told us that each of us would get our own cottage for the duration of our stay. Gardens weaved throughout. Lark explained that we were free to roam the grounds of the facility, but the north half of the island had eroding cliffs that were super dangerous. A border wall made a division between that part of the island and the facility, so as long as we didn't try to get over the wall, we'd be safe. Dr. Hart emerged from the main building to greet us. She was poised and magnetic. With piercing green eyes, they weren't unkind but had a calculating quality to them. She seemed to be assessing us from the moment she laid eyes on us. She spoke with measured confidence. "Welcome. You've made the right choice coming here. I promise, we'll take excellent care of you." She urged us to explore the island and take time to get to know the other women we'd be going on this journey with. I learned there were 20 of us. Before we were permitted to start fertility treatment, we spent our days in group therapy sessions, sharing our stories, our hopes and fears. We came from different backgrounds, different countries even, but we all shared a unique bond. Every one of us were single. We had all suffered a tragic loss of a loved one, and we all had the seemingly impossible dream of motherhood. In the evenings, we'd wander the gardens or sit by the ocean. We'd often talk late into the night, bonding further over our excitement. But I realized that Mariah, who had seemed so excited about this opportunity on the plane, was growing increasingly nervous about being on the island. She didn't want to talk loudly about it, though, as she said we were probably being watched and listened to. She seemed scared of Dr. Hart. I kept looking for hidden cameras, but I couldn't see any. I told her she was just being paranoid. I assumed now that Mariah was probably right, but then I was actually mad at her for putting a damper on everyone's excitement. Finally, the day arrived that we would be beginning treatment. We all gathered in the main building where Dr. Hart would be speaking to us. There, we realized that our group of 20 was now 14. 6 women, including Mariah, were no longer there. Dr. Hart explained that there were a few women who were assessed as incompatible for the program and so were returned home. Dr. Hart explained our treatment process in detail. They would be using innovative science that combined traditional IVF with advanced genetic optimization techniques. She told us she had made her fortune by diagnosing problems, but she wanted to fix them. "You were selected," she said, "because you understand the anguish that comes with seeing a loved one held back by nothing but their own biology. You want a better life for your children. Not only will we be ensuring you conceive, we will also be ensuring your child has the strongest possible biological foundation. A healthier, brighter future for all humanity begins here. She told us that if anyone was uncomfortable with proceeding, they were welcome to step out and they would be flown home. She also made it clear that choosing to stay would mean we'd be leaving with a child. There was no question in my mind. I was going to stay. All of the remaining women stayed. We all wanted to bring our babies home. The 14 of us then began treatment. Apart from numerous injections, it honestly felt like the best holiday I'd ever been on. We were so well cared for. We always had the best food to eat, and massages and therapy whenever we needed it. The staff were amazing. In therapy, we were encouraged to see the health benefits our children were receiving as the future of humanity. We felt good about contributing to a healthy new generation. Every single one of us became pregnant quickly. Regular scans and health checks told us our babies were growing well. I was told I'd be having a girl. I was in bliss, falling in love with my little girl who I had yet to meet. She had strong kicks inside me, so I wanted a strong name for her. I named her Freya. I wondered if she would look like her brother. One night, Claire and I were sitting on the beach beneath the stars. Both our bellies had grown large by this time. I was stroking mine with love, but Claire just stared at hers. She made a grimace as her baby gave her a mighty kick. I could even see the press of his little foot against her stomach. Claire seemed troubled, her usual bright smile replaced by a shadow of doubt. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Do you ever feel like there's something off about all this?" She responded quietly, her voice barely audible over the waves. "Off? No," I said quickly. But for some reason, I had the intense feeling I was lying. I pushed the feeling away because I didn't want to believe it, not when I was so close to finally holding my daughter in my arms. "Do you understand the specific treatment they've given to us and our babies?" Claire asked. "I'm not a doctor or a scientist," I responded. "I don't understand any of that technical stuff, but I know they know what they're doing. That's all that matters to me." "What if there's something I don't know wrong with our kids?" Claire asked me, eyes filling with tears. "There's nothing wrong. They've been monitoring them all so closely." I smiled, took her hand in mine, and said reassuringly, "I think it's just nerves. We've all been through so much to get here." Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. The next day, Claire was in therapy practically the whole day. When she met me for dinner, she had her usual smile back on her face. "You're right. It was definitely just nerves. I don't know what came over me. I forgot how truly lucky I am to be a part of all this. How lucky my child is. Aren't we lucky?" I nodded and gave her a huge hug, squeezing her tightly. We were told that for the safety of us and our babies, that delivering a little early by C-section would be best. We received the delivery schedule. Claire was to be first. I was last. I couldn't help but feel angry that I would be the last of us to be able to hold my child. But I reminded myself that I'd probably forget that feeling as soon as Freya was in my arms. The deliveries were to happen over 2 days, 7 one day, 7 the next. I felt extremely restless on the day when Claire and the others were going to have their babies. I couldn't stay still. I decided to go for a walk. I walked and kept on walking. No one stopped me, the staff very busy with the deliveries. For some reason, I kept heading north. I don't know what took me there, but eventually I got to the border wall. Coming up against it made me frustrated that I couldn't keep walking. The wall was made of stone and was topped with electric wire. Pretty extreme, I thought. I couldn't help but wonder what was on the other side. At the time, I told myself that I just desperately needed something to distract myself from the agony of waiting to hold my child. But deep down, I think I was actually scared about what information they were keeping from us. I decided to climb a tree. Not easy and pretty stupid, considering I was so pregnant. But I was consumed with seeing what was over that wall. I climbed and climbed until I could see, row upon row of identical, simple gravestones. "Hello," I heard the voice echoing up from below the tree. I looked down to see Dr. Hart staring up at me. I hadn't heard her following me. When did she get there? It's best if you come down now, she said. I climbed down as carefully as I could manage. What is that over there? I asked her. We were told there were dangerous cliffs, but that's not true, is it? It's a cemetery, she told me. I never wanted it hidden, but there were those at the Institute who thought our facility would be more peaceful without it in view. Healthier for the mothers. Who are they? I mean, who are buried there? I asked her, not really wanting to know the answer. In our line of work, pushing the boundaries of science and human potential, there are moments of profound loss, she said. Not every story here has a perfect ending. The individuals memorialized there were part of this journey, just as you are now. They entrusted us with their dreams, their deepest hopes, and though the outcomes were not what we wished, their courage paved the way for the advancements we've made today. I was speechless. I held onto my belly tightly, feeling my daughter stretching inside. Don't be scared. We are all part of something larger than ourselves here, Dr. Hart continued. You and your daughter will be fine. We've come a long, long way. Your daughter, she will be perfect. I felt myself start to hyperventilate. Breathe, breathe, remember to breathe. I heard Dr. Hart say, as darkness started to overtake my sight. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in a bed. I was terribly confused and in pain. I felt my belly and I knew my baby was gone. Where is she? I shouted out. Where's my baby? Where's my daughter? Dr. Hart entered my room. Shh, she said. Your baby is fine. We delivered her. She's healthy. You fainted. We decided it was best to move up your delivery to today. But don't worry. Everything went well. You and your daughter are perfectly healthy. My daughter. Freya, can I see her? I pleaded. Of course you can, said Dr. Hart. She waved in a nurse, who was holding a baby wrapped in a blanket, Freya. When I looked at her, I knew immediately she was mine. She reminded me so much of Oliver. Her little button nose was the same as his, which matched mine also. And she had the same dark hair with soft waves to it. But she was a lot bigger than Oliver. She seemed so much stronger, and her eyes were wide open, taking in everything with total awareness. The nurse asked if I'd like to feed her, passing me a bottle with formula. I asked if I could breastfeed her, but Dr. Hart told me that wouldn't be a good idea. She lifted Freya's lips to show that she had a full row of gleaming pointy teeth. I was shocked. Dr. Hart reminded me that my daughter was given biological advantages to ensure she'd thrive. She then picked up a scalpel and sliced into Freya's little leg. Freya let out a wail. I pulled my baby away from Dr. Hart. What are you doing? I screamed at her. Look, she said. Your daughter is fine. I looked down to Freya's leg to see. The cut had closed. In front of my eyes, it healed. You will never need to worry about your child being sick or hurt, Dr. Hart said. She's perfect. I looked down at my daughter. She had stopped crying. Her little wide eyes were now watching me. Yes, she is perfect, I said. I love her to the stars and back, and always will. Dr. Hart smiled. We spent Freya's first year on the island with the rest of the Genesis children. That's what we called the children born to us 14. It was a dream. Freya grew quickly. All the children did. They all hit milestones far ahead of schedule. Freya crawled at 2 months, walked at 5, and her first words were eerily articulate for someone barely out of infancy. From her first days, her eyes, full of curious intelligence, seemed to hold more understanding than they should. I marveled at all of her achievements. Claire and I got closer in the year too. She watched her son, Kian, grow with as much amazement as me. Any worries she had before seemed to be washed away, seeing him laugh and play with his friends. After the first year, Dr. Hart arranged for us all to transition into the real world. Freya and I were placed in a fully furnished apartment. It was beautiful, a dream, really. Knowing that was our home, I should have felt comfortable there. But the first night, I couldn't fall asleep. I was super restless. I tossed and turned for hours. I settled myself thinking I was probably just missing the comfort of the island, the family I'd formed between the mothers, children, and staff. Finally, I fell asleep. I dreamt about the island, dreamt about Freya and I in our cottage, but in my dream I left Freya. I walked away north, to the cemetery. I got to the wall and it loomed over me. So I pushed, and pushed, and pushed, until it crumbled. Beyond it were the gravestones, and Mariah. She was standing there, half buried in a grave, and she was staring right at me. I woke with a start. I tried to shake the nightmare of Mariah from my head, but it was almost as if I could hear her voice whispering. I couldn't hear what she said, but it made me remember about what she had said on the island about cameras. I got out of bed, and I searched every corner, but couldn't find anything. I felt foolish for looking. We had regularly scheduled health checks with the Institute staff, so they didn't need to be watching us 24/7, I told myself. I went back to bed. Freya thrived. She excelled in school. Almost too much, though. She continued to be placed ahead of her age group. It made it a bit challenging for her to find friends. But she had fun in sports. She joined the swim team and was winning gold medals almost as soon as she started. And she loved painting. I kept in contact with Claire, who lived in the same city as me. Claire noticed that Kian was having challenges making friends too. It made her sad because she remembered how happy he was with the Genesis kids. I made a point of scheduling more play dates so Kian and Freya could hang out. The two got on really well. They were almost like siblings. Freya and I had a wonderful time in her childhood. She'd tell me everything about kids at school, her favorite books, what shape she thought the clouds looked like, and how she wanted to paint them. She'd break into a huge smile when she saw me cheering her on at swim meets. We'd spend hours together, her words flowing like a babbling stream. She trusted me with everything, and I relished every moment with my beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter. Every second with her felt like a miracle. When Freya was around 15, things began to shift. I noticed her temper seemed to flare more if she was hungry. I figured that was a pretty normal teen thing. I didn't think much of it, just prepared myself for perhaps a rocky teen phase, and made sure to stock the fridge well. Then Freya started being obsessed with meat, which was weird because she used to turn her nose up at it. Now it was all she ate. She'd even push away the macaroni and cheese I'd make for her, which used to be her favorite. One day I caught her licking a raw steak. I asked what she was doing, and she just snapped at me. "What? I was hungry!" I took the meat away from her and immediately scheduled a health check with the Institute. They did some tests and told me that Freya just needed more iron in her diet. They gave me a strict meal plan for her. They told me to reach out again if anything else changes. I called Claire to see if Kian was having any issues. She told me he just had a health check as well and was given his same diet. She sounded weary. I asked if everything was okay. She confided in me that Kian was having a really hard time at school. He wasn't getting on with the other kids at all, picking fights, which he'd win every time. Claire said it looked like he may be expelled. She said she had talked to the Institute about it. They said that if he couldn't manage public schooling, they would arrange a suitable boarding school for him. I hung up, thankful that Freya's problems weren't so bad in comparison. Freya managed pretty well with her new meal plan. She seemed happy. That made me happy. Then Claire called me, one day, sobbing. She said that Kian was gone. Gone? I asked, my heart plummeting into my stomach. My first thought, for some reason, was that when she said gone, that she meant dead. She was that distraught. But no, she explained that something had happened at his school. The Institute felt it best to take him and to school him in their private boarding school, where he could be more closely monitored, where his lessons would match his intelligence level better. Claire said that she wasn't able to visit him, just have him for holidays. I told her that if he was having challenges in the regular system, then boarding school would probably be great for him. She agreed. I reminded her that Christmas was just around the corner and that she'd be able to see him so soon. But then Claire said that she wished they'd keep him for Christmas too. I was shocked. "What do you mean?" I asked her. Then she whispered so quietly I could hardly hear her. "Because I'm scared of him." I tried to reassure Claire that boarding at the institute would help Kian calm down. "They know what they're doing," I said. She said, "Yes, right, of course," and said goodbye. I hung up, feeling rather rattled. I found Freya, who was reading in bed, and kissed her good night. That night I had that nightmare again, the one with Mariah in the graveyard. I woke up covered in a cold sweat. I got up out of bed to change and toss my soaked PJs in the wash. Then I noticed Freya's bedroom door was open. I looked in, she was gone. I looked about the apartment. "Freya," I called out, but there was no answer. I panicked. I ran out into the hall. "Freya," I shouted. Then I saw her. She was emerging from our neighbor's apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked her. Then she turned to me, and that's when I saw it. The blood. Blood dripping down her mouth. I ran to her. "Freya, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked. Freya looked up at me, with a look of almost shock on her face. "I was hungry," she answered plainly. I pushed into our neighbor's apartment to see the body, bloody, broken, chunks of flesh torn from it. I felt Freya grasped my arm tightly. "Mom, I didn't want to kill anyone, I swear," she said. "I was just hungry, starving. I had to eat." I felt myself begin to hyperventilate. "Mom, breathe." I heard Freya say as darkness clouded my vision, "Please, breathe." The next thing I remember is staff from the institute in my apartment. How and when they got there, I have no idea. But I saw there was still blood on Freya. They told me that they would take care of everything, that Freya needed special monitoring. They told me that she'd be taken care of in their private boarding school. Where Kian is, I managed to get out. Yes, I was told. Actually, Dr. Hart has decided that it will be best for all of the Genesis children to be schooled together from now on. A controlled environment where they can learn to manage their differences. They told me that they would keep in contact. I was so shocked that all I could do was nod. They started to usher Freya to the door. I jumped up, I wrapped Freya in a big hug and told her I loved her, that I would always love her. Then they were gone. Then I just sat there, for hours, wondering if what I told my daughter was true. I told her I loved her. How could that be true? She just killed someone, ate them. I was horrified, disgusted. It made my head swim. My beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter is, what? A monster? I puked onto the floor in front of me. But I knew what I said wasn't a lie. I still loved my daughter, and I knew I still wanted to protect her. I trusted that the institute would help her. They knew what they were doing, right? I called Claire and told her that Freya would be joining Kian at the boarding school. I wanted to tell her why, but I found I couldn't. I skirted around the truth, instead telling her that I truly believed they were both in the right place. Staff at the institute gave me updates on Freya. I was told she was taken back to the island with the other Genesis children where a boarding school was set up. I was assured they had the best teachers available. At first, the updates about Freya came regularly. The institute staff told me that she was adjusting well to life among the other children, and Freya would write me letters. We were able to keep up a connection at the beginning. But over time, the updates grew sparse. Then Freya stopped replying to my letters. When I tried to call, the staff were polite but evasive. Eventually, the communication stopped entirely. It had been 2 years since I last saw Freya. It terrified me when I wasn't able to contact anyone. I was desperate for any type of communication. What if Freya was hurt, and I didn't know? What if she was dead? I wanted to go to the island, but I had no idea where it was. Claire urged me to leave it. She said it was best to just let the institute take care of things. She reminded me what I told her. They know what they're doing. Then the news broke. A staff member from the institute, one of the survivors, she was the one that went to the media. When she was interviewed, I recognized her immediately. Lark. I remember how happy and kind she was welcoming me to the island. Now her face looked haunted. She shared footage of the massacre. I hardly recognized the island when I saw it first. It was no longer an oasis. CCTV footage captured what looked like scenes from a horror film. Bodies of staff members, ripped apart, lay strewn across the grounds. Multiple video angles, all around the facility, all over the gardens. The footage showed Lark cowering by a group of Genesis children, pleading for her life. I say children because that's how I knew them. But they didn't look like children anymore. They looked like strong young adults in their 20s. But I immediately recognized the person leading the group. It was Kian. I scoured the other faces for Freya, hoping with all my soul I wouldn't see her amongst these faces covered in blood, predator eyes gleaming with the hunt. But she was there. My heart sank when I saw her. But then, at the same time, it lifted. She was alive. My daughter was alive. "We will let you deliver the message," Kian told Lark. "Humanity has had its time," he said. "We are the future." Then Kian turned to speak directly to a CCTV camera. "They thought they could control us," he shouted. "They thought they were superior because they made us. No, we are stronger, faster, smarter. Humans are below us. Why should we bow to them? Why should we be caged?" Those behind him cheered defiantly, including Freya. They all turned and left. Lark, left alive, shook with sobs. The CCTV footage then showed the children getting on boats and leaving the island. The news then showed how the island was swarmed by police and international investigators. Of course, I'm sure you've probably seen all this. Bodies were identified. But Dr. Hart, who had funded the institute, was not among them. There is no evidence of where she could be. All other CCTV footage and institute files appear to have been destroyed. They are currently readying to start an extensive exhumation of the cemetery found on the north part of the island. I've spent day, nights, all waking hours, combing through the news, desperate for any sign of Freya. The attacks have now become widespread. It seems the children have probably split into smaller hunting groups. They strike swiftly, devouring adults, teens, children, anyone they can find. Then they disappear, as if becoming one with the shadows, only to reappear somewhere else when they become hungry again. No one knows where they stay in between attacks. I know everyone is afraid. For my part, I am sorry. But I still love Freya. I can't stop loving my daughter. When I first saw the footage, I, like many of you I'm sure, ran to lock my door immediately. I was terrified too. But then I unlocked it, because, truthfully, I want my daughter to return to me. I told you I wanted to tell you the truth. My daughter is missing and I want to find her. I want to wrap her in my arms and keep her safe. I love her to the stars and back. I want her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. That's what a good mother does, right? And I'll be completely honest with you now, because I hate telling a lie. I'm not sure what lengths I will go to make sure she's happy. But I want to make sure good people aren't hurt, killed, eaten. Not when there are bad people out there. If my daughter needs meat, needs blood, there's no reason for her to feed on good people. I don't want you to be eaten. I promise you that. Because you're good people, right? Right. I know you are. My daughter is missing, but I don't want you to find her. I can find more suitable food for her, I promise. The shadows have more secrets to reveal, and the next one is unforgettable. I have been trapped inside my car and no one can rescue me. My car won't let me out. I reached home around 1 a.m. and parked the car next to the curb in front of my house. Switching off the ignition and pocketing the keys, I unlocked the door and got out of the car, only to find myself right back into the driver's seat, sitting exactly as I was before. I stopped for a moment, confused. The streetlights over my house went out, freaking me out even further. Just a coincidence, probably. Still a bit dazed, I opened the door and got out again. And this time, too, I found myself right back in the driver's seat, with the door locked and the keys still in ignition. Once it could be a slip-up in imagination, twice it could be the lack of sleep. But this kept on happening every single time I tried to get out of the door. 10 times. 20 times. Every attempt to escape was met with a chilling reality. The car, a malevolent entity in its own right, thwarted my efforts, returning me to my seat with an eerie precision. Annoyed and petrified at the same time, I rolled down my window. Thinking I could maybe jump out of it, I leaned through the window and pushed myself off the floor of the car. I was hoping I'd land hands first. As soon as my fingers touched the ground, I thought I was safe. But the very next second, I found myself back in the driver's seat, exactly as I was, except there was some dust on my clothes. Not only that, I noticed that all the windows in my car had now turned an opaque black. I tried to roll the driver's window down again, but it was jammed. I tried the other windows, but none would budge. The only way for me to see outside was through my front windshield. It still won't let me out. I gulped. Ping, ping. My phone buzzed. My roommate, Sid, was calling me. "Dude, where the hell are you? Are you coming back tonight?" said Sid. He reminded me that I had forgotten to take the keys when I had left tonight. I gave Sid a half-baked explanation about how I was right outside the house, but my car door was jammed and I wasn't able to get out. "Could you help me out?" I requested. "Yeah." "I'll be out there in a minute," he said, ending the call. I waited for about 10 minutes. The cold breeze of the night swept some dried leaves with it in front of me. Ping! This time it was a message from Sid. "Sid, dude, don't fuck with me, okay? M.E." "What the hell do you mean?" "Sid, you're not here. No one's here. And why the hell is the street light not working?" "M.E. I'm in my car." "Sid, and where's your car?" "M.E. Next to the curb." The blackened windows blocked my view, but I kept banging against them to let Sid I was right there. "Sid, are you sure?" Was I sure? I didn't understand. Why was he making a whole fuzz? Ping! A photo from Sid. I opened it. It was the view from our front porch. As my eyes followed the driveway to the curb, I was horrified to see that the spot where my car should have been parked, with me stuck inside, was completely empty. SID. Is this another one of those drunk pranks by you and your friends? I was too stunned to answer. The photo didn't make sense to me at all. Sid, yeah, I'm going back in. Stay at your friends or whatever. Good night. I started shouting his name out of the car, but I got no answer. He had also stopped replying to my texts and calls. I contemplated if I could click a photo of the driveway from my angle when I got out of the car to tell Sid I was really here. Preparing myself mentally, I opened my phone's camera and switched on the flash. Then I unlocked the car door and got out. As soon as my feet touched the road, I clicked a photo. When I found myself back in the driver's seat again, I unlocked my phone and checked my gallery. I saw that the flash of my camera had captured a hazy yet grotesque sight. Standing 5 feet away from my car was what I could only describe as a tall, menacing, shadowy figure. Its eyes, if it even had any, seemed like deep, distant pits of darkness. Its form was indistinct, but I could tell it was standing on inhuman limbs. A twisted, gnarly hand of bone jutted out of the figure's body, reaching out for my camera. Terror seized me as my blood ran cold. Disbelief surged through my mind. I was sure there was nothing in the driveway when I just went outside. Screech. Nails hit against my darkened window, trying to break it down. The ensuing horror that washed over me made me switch on the ignition and hit the accelerator like a damn madman. Down the straight, hard right. A few blocks to an intersection. Left, another left. The roads were very empty. Expected, given how it was 2 a.m. in the night. I kept on taking any random street possible till my heart, which had been beating hard enough to launch me to the moon, returned to a normal pace and allowed me to take a few easy breaths. I passed by the church I used to visit when I was younger. The door was closed, but I could see the lights on inside. Father Romano always let the church remain open for whoever wanted to get the Lord's blessings. And I definitely needed some of his magic. My hands were fatigued and my eyes were starting to feel the numbness which comes when you want to fall asleep. But I didn't have it in me to have some rest. I stopped under a bridge and took a few deep breaths. The shadowy figure was nowhere to be seen around, but I couldn't be so sure. She said it was best to just let the Institute take care of things. She reminded me what I told her. They know what they're doing. Then the news broke. A staff member from the Institute, one of the survivors, she was the one that went to the media. When she was interviewed, I recognized her immediately. Lark. I remember how happy and kind she was welcoming me to the island. Now her face looked haunted. She shared footage of the massacre. I hardly recognized the island when I saw it first. It was no longer an oasis. CCTV footage captured what looked like scenes from a horror film. Bodies of staff members, ripped apart, lay strewn across the grounds. Multiple video angles, all around the facility, all over the gardens. The footage showed Lark cowering by a group of Genesis children, pleading for her life. I say children because that's how I knew them. But they didn't look like children anymore. They looked like strong young adults in their 20s. But I immediately recognized the person leading the group. It was Kian. I scoured the other faces for Freya, hoping with all my soul I wouldn't see her amongst these faces covered in blood, predator eyes gleaming with the hunt. But she was there. My heart sank when I saw her. But then, at the same time, it lifted. She was alive. My daughter was alive. We will let you deliver the message, Kian told Lark. Humanity has had its time, he said. We are the future. Then Kian turned to speak directly to a CCTV camera. They thought they could control us, he shouted. They thought they were superior because they made us. No, we are stronger, faster, smarter. Humans are below us. Why should we bow to them? Why should we be caged? Those behind him cheered defiantly, including Freya. They all turned and left. Lark, left alive, shook with sobs. The CCTV footage then showed the children getting on boats and leaving the island. The news then showed how the island was swarmed by police and international investigators. Of course, I'm sure you've probably seen all this. Bodies were identified. But Dr. Hart, who had funded the institute, was not among them. There is no evidence of where she could be. All other CCTV footage and institute files appear to have been destroyed. They are currently readying to start an extensive exhumation of the cemetery found on the north part of the island. I've spent day, nights, all waking hours, combing through the news, desperate for any sign of Freya. The attacks have now become widespread. It seems the children have probably split into smaller hunting groups. They strike swiftly, devouring adults, teens, children, anyone they can find. Then they disappear, as if becoming one with the shadows, only to reappear somewhere else when they become hungry again. No one knows where they stay in between attacks. I know everyone is afraid. For my part, I am sorry. But I still love Freya. I can't stop loving my daughter. When I first saw the footage, I, like many of you I'm sure, ran to lock my door immediately. I was terrified too. But then I unlocked it, because, truthfully, I want my daughter to return to me. I told you I wanted to tell you the truth. My daughter is missing and I want to find her. I want to wrap her in my arms and keep her safe. I love her to the stars and back. I want her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. That's what a good mother does, right? And I'll be completely honest with you now, because I hate telling a lie. I'm not sure what lengths I will go to make sure she's happy. But I want to make sure good people aren't hurt, killed, eaten. Not when there are bad people out there. If my daughter needs meat, needs blood, there's no reason for her to feed on good people. I don't want you to be eaten. I promise you that. Because you're good people, right? Right. I know you are. My daughter is missing, but I don't want you to find her. I can find more suitable food for her, I promise. The shadows have more secrets to reveal. And the next one is unforgettable. I have been trapped inside my car and no one can rescue me. My car won't let me out. I reached home around 1 a.m. and parked the car next to the curb in front of my house. Switching off the ignition and pocketing the keys, I unlocked the door and got out of the car, only to find myself right back into the driver's seat, sitting exactly as I was before. I stopped for a moment, confused. The streetlights over my house went out, freaking me out even further. Just a coincidence, probably. Still a bit dazed, I opened the door and got out again. And this time, too, I found myself right back in the driver's seat, with the door locked and the keys still in ignition. Once, it could be a slip-up in imagination. Twice, it could be the lack of sleep. But this kept on happening every single time I tried to get out of the door. 10 times. 20 times. Every attempt to escape was met with a chilling reality. The car, a malevolent entity in its own right, thwarted my efforts, returning me to my seat with an eerie precision. Annoyed and petrified at the same time, I rolled down my window. Thinking I could maybe jump out of it, I leaned through the window and pushed myself off the floor of the car. I was hoping I'd land hands first. As soon as my fingers touched the ground, I thought I was safe. But the very next second, I found myself back in the driver's seat, exactly as I was, except there was some dust on my clothes. Not only that, I noticed that all the windows in my car had now turned an opaque black. I tried to roll the driver's window down again, but it was jammed. I tried the other windows, but none would budge. The only way for me to see outside was through my front windshield. It still won't let me out. I gulped. Ping, ping. My phone buzzed. My roommate, Sid, was calling me. "Dude, where the hell are you? Are you coming back tonight?" said Sid. He reminded me that I had forgotten to take the keys when I had left tonight. I gave Sid a half-baked explanation about how I was right outside the house, but my car door was jammed and I wasn't able to get out. "Could you help me out?" I requested. "Yeah." "I'll be out there in a minute," he said, ending the call. I waited for about 10 minutes. The cold breeze of the night swept some dried leaves with it in front of me. Ping! This time it was a message from Sid. "Sid, dude, don't fuck with me, okay? M.E. "What the hell do you mean?" "Sid, you're not here. No one's here. And why the hell is the streetlight not working?" "M.E. I'm in my car." "Sid, and where's your car?" "M.E. Next to the curb. The blackened windows blocked my view. But I kept banging against them to let Sid I was right there." "Sid, are you sure?" Was I sure? I didn't understand. Why was he making a whole fuzz? Ping! A photo from Sid. I opened it. It was the view from our front porch. As my eyes followed the driveway to the curb, I was horrified to see that the spot where my car should have been parked, with me stuck inside, was completely empty. SID. Is this another one of those drunk pranks by you and your friends? I was too stunned to answer. The photo didn't make sense to me at all. "Sid, yeah, I'm going back in. Stay at your friend's or whatever. Good night." I started shouting his name out of the car, but I got no answer. He had also stopped replying to my texts and calls. I contemplated if I could click a photo of the driveway from my angle when I got out of the car to tell Sid I was really here. Preparing myself mentally, I opened my phone's camera and switched on the flash. Then I unlocked the car door and got out. As soon as my feet touched the road, I clicked a photo. When I found myself back in the driver's seat again, I unlocked my phone and checked my gallery. I saw that the flash of my camera had captured a hazy yet grotesque sight. Standing 5 feet away from my car was what I could only describe as a tall, menacing, shadowy figure. Its eyes, if it even had any, seemed like deep, distant pits of darkness. Its form was indistinct, but I could tell it was standing on inhuman limbs. A twisted, gnarly hand of bone jutted out of the figure's body, reaching out for my camera. Terror seized me as my blood ran cold. Disbelief surged through my mind. I was sure there was nothing in the driveway when I just went outside. Screech. Nails hit against my darkened window, trying to break it down. The ensuing horror that washed over me made me switch on the ignition and hit the accelerator like a damn madman. Down the straight, hard right. A few blocks to an intersection. Left, another left. The roads were very empty. Expected, given how it was 2 a.m. in the night. I kept on taking any random street possible till my heart, which had been beating hard enough to launch me to the moon, returned to a normal pace and allowed me to take a few easy breaths. I passed by the church I used to visit when I was younger. The door was closed, but I could see the lights on inside. Father Romano always let the church remain open for whoever wanted to get the Lord's blessings. And I definitely needed some of his magic. My hands were fatigued and my eyes were starting to feel the numbness which comes when you want to fall asleep. But I didn't have it in me to have some rest. I stopped under a bridge and took a few deep breaths. The shadowy figure was nowhere to be seen around, but I couldn't be so sure. I sighed. The radio in my car had crapped out on me a while back, and I thought I had fixed it. Apparently not well enough, though. The next hour or so of driving was going to be mind-numbingly dull without tunes. I glanced down at the clock on the dash and sighed. Oh great, I thought. Now the clock is busted too. The numbers still showed 12 a.m. I shook my head. Baby, I love you, but you have some serious issues. My car was my pride and joy, even if she had seen better days. A 1991 Camaro Rs. It was white, with red racing stripes. The paint job was custom, but had seen better days. Not to mention that the radiator was held together with JB Weld, and it had over 200,000 miles on the engine. Needless to say, the old girl could use some TLC. That is, when I could afford it. I shrugged off my worries about the time and the radio and kept on driving. Eventually, up ahead in the distance, I thought I could make out a faint light. As I drove on, the solitary beacon grew brighter and brighter, a lighthouse shining in a sea of night. After what felt like miles and miles, the light finally resolved into a bright neon sign. The sign had a long green snake looped around fiery red words, the Midway Saloon. I pulled into the parking and thought it looked about like any other dive bar I had ever seen. There were a handful of classic cars and Harley-Davidsons parked out front, but the thing that stood out the most was standing there hitched to a post staring at me. It wasn't too unusual to see horses at bars. This was the South after all. But this horse was different. It was absolutely massive, solid black with a gleaming black saddle. The way the big animal's eyes reflected the light almost seemed to make them glow. I parked next to an old Cadillac and stepped out onto the gravel lot. The warm air seemed to grow cooler under the giant horse's gaze. It watched me all the way to the door, the glow in its eyes never faltering. Stepping through the saloon doors, I was met with the familiar smell of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. A jukebox in the corner played a song I had heard at least 100 times, but for some reason I couldn't place it. The patrons played pool, darts, and leaned against the bar, talking loudly. The bartender looked up from behind the bar. He was a big guy in a crisp white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. He had a bushy beard and dark, slicked-back hair. He put down the glass he had been cleaning and met my eyes. "New around here, huh? Well, what can I get you?" I nodded. Yeah. Actually, I'm just passing through, but I'm not really sure where here is." He smiled and shook his head. "Passing through. That's a good one." I sat down at the bar and ordered a beer. "So, I'm trying to get to Highway 9, but I think I made a wrong turn somewhere. Could you tell me how to get to where I need to be?" The bartender shook his head and sat the beer in front of me. "No, I can't tell you that. I can tell you, however, you are a long way from where you want to be." "What does that mean?" I asked. The big man just smiled and went back to cleaning the same glass. I glanced around the bar, noticing the way the people were dressed. It was like some crazy decades party or something. In one corner, I saw a guy dressed like a 1950s greaser, playing darts with a guy who looked like a 90s punk rocker, blue mohawk and everything. At the other end of the bar sat what looked like a Wall Street banker, talking with a couple Civil War reenactors. "You all having a costume party or something?" I asked the bartender. He just smiled at me again and continued cleaning the glass. I shook my head and took a sip of my beer. Glancing around the bar again, I noticed a man sitting alone in one dark corner. He had a long black coat and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. "Is that the guy who owns that beast of a horse out there?" I asked, motioning to the man. The bartender stopped cleaning the glass as the bar went silent. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me, almost every eye. I looked around at the people surrounding me, then to the back of the room, where the man sat alone. His dark hat tilted up as he looked at me. He had the same cold glow in his eyes I had seen in the horse outside. I felt a chill run up my spine, and my skin grew hot under that gaze. He didn't just look at me, he looked into me. It was like he could see down to my soul, to the very fiber of my being. I felt panic rising from nowhere. Just then I felt an iron grip on my arm. I turned away from that unnatural gaze and looked at the bartender. "You had best be on your way, son." I nodded and stood up from the bar. Which way do I go?" I asked. His face took on a grim countenance. "Just keep following the road." I nodded. "What do I owe you for the beer?" Smiling warmly again, he said, "First one's always free." I frowned at that, and he went back to cleaning the glass. As he did, the commotion of the bar resumed, as if it had never stopped. I stepped out of the strange saloon and avoided looking at the horse as I made my way back to my car. I just needed to get back on the road and away from whatever the hell that was. Pulling back onto the blacktop, I quickly left the Midway Saloon far behind me. I had been driving for what felt like hours at this point. Where the hell was I? How could I have become so lost? Just then I saw something up ahead in the distance. At first it was just vague, dark shapes against more darkness. But as I got closer, the shapes resolved into buildings and houses. It was a town. As the town came into focus, my exhausted brain caught up with what seemed so out of place. It was a town with no lights. What the hell? The road I was on led right down the center of the dark town. As I slowed down, I looked from side to side at the buildings lining the street. The buildings looked old, made of dark red brick and wood, but they weren't run down or abandoned, just empty and dark. There were streetlights, but none of them were on. I didn't see any other cars in the town either. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen any other cars all night. I pulled my car to a stop at the center of town and rolled down my window. The sound of my car's engine reverberated through the town. It seemed so incredibly loud in the utter emptiness. I killed the engine and stepped out onto the dark, empty road. My headlights were still on, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move out of the beam. I turned to look for whatever or whoever was there, but I didn't see anything. "Hello?" I shouted. The echo of my voice bounced around and distorted before going silent. After a moment more of silence, I began to get back into my car when I heard it. "Hello?" Goosebumps rose on my skin as I whipped around looking for the answering voice, the voice that sounded almost exactly like mine. My eyes scanned the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. This was wrong. This place, it felt wrong. I couldn't understand it, but I felt eyes on me from every direction, just like back at the bar, but I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I whispered under my breath. The moment stretched as the silence of the town seemed to swallow the sound of my voice. "Hello?" A voice whispered back. I spun and jumped into my car, my heart pounding. The voice had been right behind me. I could swear I felt a warm breath on my neck. I frantically rolled the window up and looked around for the voice, but there was no one there. I reached for the ignition and turned the key, but the damn thing wouldn't start. Suddenly, a streetlight at the end of the block started flickering on and off. Standing directly under the light was a man. I couldn't make out many details at this distance, but what I could see chilled me to the bone. His clothes hung on him like rags, and his skin looked cracked and dark, like charcoal. He stood there crookedly, staring at me. When the light flickered back out, he was gone. I could still see the darkened streetlight, but the man had disappeared. He was just gone. I turned the key again and again. "Fucking come on!" I shouted. When the streetlight flickered back on, I could see the man again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was at least a dozen charred figures standing under the light now. They jerkily moved and shifted towards me as the light flickered. "Fucking come on!" they all shouted in my voice. I watched in horror as they broke into a run just as the light flickered back out. Finally, the engine roared to life and I slammed it into gear. As I tore through the dark town, my headlights illuminated dozens more charred figures. Their skeletal hands reached out for me as I blazed past them. I could hear their nails scratching into my car's paint as I passed them by. I accelerated faster out of the town and back onto the long, dark road. My head was spinning. They weren't real. They can't be real. I could barely see straight. I briefly thought about heading back to the Midway, but I couldn't stop. Real or not, I had to get away from that town. I had to keep driving. The only problem was, I could no longer tell how long I had been driving. Time seemed strange. I stared down at the gas gauge and prayed it was broken also. I couldn't remember how long I had been on half a tank. I sighed. The radio in my car had crapped out on me a while back, and I thought I had fixed it. Apparently not well enough, though. The next hour or so of driving was going to be mind-numbingly dull without tunes. I glanced down at the clock on the dash and sighed. Oh, great, I thought. Now the clock is busted too. The numbers still showed 12 a.m. I shook my head. "Baby, I love you, but you have some serious issues." My car was my pride and joy, even if she had seen better days. A 1991 Camaro Rs. It was white with red racing stripes. The paint job was custom, but had seen better days. Not to mention that the radiator was held together with JB Weld, and it had over 200,000 miles on the engine. Needless to say, the old girl could use some TLC. That is, when I could afford it. I shrugged off my worries about the time and the radio and kept on driving. Eventually, up ahead in the distance, I thought I could make out a faint light. As I drove on, the solitary beacon grew brighter and brighter, a lighthouse shining in a sea of night. After what felt like miles and miles, the light finally resolved into a bright neon sign. The sign had a long green snake looped around fiery red words, "The Midway Saloon." I pulled into the parking and thought it looked about like any other dive bar I had ever seen. There were a handful of classic cars and Harley-Davidsons parked out front, but the thing that stood out the most was standing there hitched to a post staring at me. It wasn't too unusual to see horses at bars. This was the South after all. But this horse was different. It was absolutely massive, solid black with a gleaming black saddle. The way the big animal's eyes reflected the light almost seemed to make them glow. I parked next to an old Cadillac and stepped out onto the gravel lot. The warm air seemed to grow cooler under the giant horse's gaze. It watched me all the way to the door, the glow in its eyes never faltering. Stepping through the saloon doors, I was met with the familiar smell of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. A jukebox in the corner played a song I had heard at least 100 times, but for some reason I couldn't place it. The patrons played pool, darts, and leaned against the bar talking loudly. The bartender looked up from behind the bar. He was a big guy in a crisp white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. He had a bushy beard and dark slicked-back hair. He put down the glass he had been cleaning and met my eyes. "New around here, huh? Well, what can I get you?" I nodded. Yeah. Actually, I'm just passing through, but I'm not really sure where here is." He smiled and shook his head. "Passing through. That's a good one." I sat down at the bar and ordered a beer. "So, I'm trying to get to Highway 9, but I think I made a wrong turn somewhere. Could you tell me how to get to where I need to be?" The bartender shook his head and sat the beer in front of me. No, I can't tell you that. I can tell you, however, you are a long way from where you want to be. What does that mean? I asked. The big man just smiled and went back to cleaning the same glass. I glanced around the bar, noticing the way the people were dressed. It was like some crazy decades party or something. In one corner, I saw a guy dressed like a 1950s greaser, playing darts with a guy who looked like a 90s punk rocker, blue mohawk and everything. At the other end of the bar sat what looked like a Wall Street banker, talking with a couple Civil War reenactors. You all having a costume party or something? I asked the bartender. He just smiled at me again and continued cleaning the glass. I shook my head and took a sip of my beer. Glancing around the bar again, I noticed a man sitting alone in one dark corner. He had a long black coat and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. Is that the guy who owns that beast of a horse out there? I asked, motioning to the man. The bartender stopped cleaning the glass as the bar went silent. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me, almost every eye. I looked around at the people surrounding me, then to the back of the room, where the man sat alone. His dark hat tilted up as he looked at me. He had the same cold glow in his eyes I had seen in the horse outside. I felt a chill run up my spine, and my skin grew hot under that gaze. He didn't just look at me, he looked into me. It was like he could see down to my soul, to the very fiber of my being. I felt panic rising from nowhere. Just then I felt an iron grip on my arm. I turned away from that unnatural gaze and looked at the bartender. You had best be on your way, son. I nodded and stood up from the bar. Which way do I go? I asked. His face took on a grim countenance. Just keep following the road. I nodded. What do I owe you for the beer? Smiling warmly again, he said, First one's always free. I frowned at that and he went back to cleaning the glass. As he did, the commotion of the bar resumed, as if it had never stopped. I stepped out of the strange saloon and avoided looking at the horse as I made my way back to my car. I just needed to get back on the road and away from whatever the hell that was. Pulling back onto the blacktop, I quickly left the Midway Saloon far behind me. I had been driving for what felt like hours at this point. Where the hell was I? How could I have become so lost? Just then I saw something up ahead in the distance. At first it was just vague, dark shapes against more darkness. But as I got closer, the shapes resolved into buildings and houses. It was a town. As the town came into focus, my exhausted brain caught up with what seemed so out of place. It was a town with no lights. What the hell? The road I was on led right down the center of the dark town. As I slowed down, I looked from side to side at the buildings lining the street. The buildings looked old, made of dark red brick and wood, but they weren't run down or abandoned, just empty and dark. There were streetlights, but none of them were on. I didn't see any other cars in the town either. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen any other cars all night. I pulled my car to a stop at the center of town and rolled down my window. The sound of my car's engine reverberated through the town. It seemed so incredibly loud in the utter emptiness. I killed the engine and stepped out onto the dark, empty road. My headlights were still on, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move out of the beam. I turned to look for whatever or whoever was there, but I didn't see anything. Hello? I shouted. The echo of my voice bounced around and distorted before going silent. After a moment more of silence, I began to get back into my car when I heard it. Hello? Goosebumps rose on my skin as I whipped around looking for the answering voice. The voice that sounded almost exactly like mine. My eyes scanned the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. This was wrong. This place, it felt wrong. I couldn't understand it, but I felt eyes on me from every direction, just like back at the bar, but I couldn't see anyone. Hello? I whispered under my breath. The moment stretched as the silence of the town seemed to swallow the sound of my voice. Hello? A voice whispered back. I spun and jumped into my car, my heart pounding. The voice had been right behind me. I could swear I felt a warm breath on my neck. I frantically rolled the window up and looked around for the voice, but there was no one there. I reached for the ignition and turned the key, but the damn thing wouldn't start. Suddenly, a streetlight at the end of the block started flickering on and off. Standing directly under the light was a man. I couldn't make out many details at this distance, but what I could see chilled me to the bone. His clothes hung on him like rags, and his skin looked cracked and dark, like charcoal. He stood there crookedly, staring at me. When the light flickered back out, he was gone. I could still see the darkened streetlight, but the man had disappeared. He was just gone. I turned the key again and again. "Fucking come on!" I shouted. When the streetlight flickered back on, I could see the man again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was at least a dozen charred figures standing under the light now. They jerkily moved and shifted towards me as the light flickered. "Fucking come on!" they all shouted in my voice. I watched in horror as they broke into a run just as the light flickered back out. Finally, the engine roared to life and I slammed it into gear. As I tore through the dark town, my headlights illuminated dozens more charred figures. Their skeletal hands reached out for me as I blazed past them. I could hear their nails scratching into my car's paint as I passed them by. I accelerated faster out of the town and back onto the long, dark road. My head was spinning. They weren't real. They can't be real. I could barely see straight. I briefly thought about heading back to the Midway, but I couldn't stop. Real or not, I had to get away from that town. I had to keep driving. The only problem was, I could no longer tell how long I had been driving. Time seemed strange. I stared down at the gas gauge and prayed it was broken also. I couldn't remember how long I had been on half a tank. The road and the endless darkness beyond it seemed to stretch on for eternity. After another indeterminate time of driving, trees began appearing sporadically along the sides of the road. Eventually, they grew in numbers until both sides of the road were heavily forested. The road began to twist and wind. What was once a long, straight stretch of emptiness was now a serpentine path through towering trees and woodlands. I was truly lost, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around, to face those things in that town again. When I came around the next curve, I slammed hard on my brakes. Right in front of me was a large old iron bridge. My mind raced. This was the first time the road had deviated from being anything but blacktop. I shook the feeling off. It was just a road. A very long, uninhabited road. I stepped out of my car and looked around at the surrounding forest. It was so quiet, there should have at least been animal noises, right? Crickets, owls, coyotes, something. But there was absolutely no sound. I walked toward the old bridge. I wasn't sure it would be safe to drive across. I needed to get a closer look before trusting it to hold. My footsteps echoed through the forest as I stepped up to where the asphalt met the wooden planks of the bridge. I stared down. The dark, pristine asphalt gave way to rotted-looking wood. I cautiously extended my foot and placed it down onto the wood. The step seemed louder than it should have been and echoed down into whatever was below the bridge. It seemed sturdy enough, so I walked out onto it, testing the structure by jumping up and down. "Is someone there?" I froze. It was a woman's voice, and it came from under the bridge. "Hello? Is someone there?" she called. I turned as quietly as I could, began to make my way back to my car. The voice wasn't a mimic of mine this time, but I still didn't trust anyone who hung around under bridges. I made it 3 steps before the boards creaked under my step. The woman's voice came again. "Hello? I need help. Please, I'm hurt." I swallowed hard. The voice sounded sincere. What if it was someone like me, lost on this road and trapped down there? How could I just leave her down there? I decided to take a chance. "Hello? I'm here. Where are you?" The voice sighed in relief. "Oh, thank God. I'm down here, under the bridge. I fell off and my leg is pinned under a rock. Can you please come down and help me?" "Okay," I said. "Let me go get a flashlight from my car. Is there a path down I can use to get to you?" "Yes, I can see a path down. Just Follow the sound of my voice. I hurried to my car and grabbed a heavy mag light from my trunk. Luckily, the batteries were still good, and I was able to find the path that led below the bridge. Okay, I'm coming. Please hurry, I've been down here so long. No one would stop to help me. I was halfway down the path and paused. You've seen other cars on the road? I asked. The voice was silent for a moment. Then she said, Please hurry, it hurts. 1 minute, I said. I think I have a first aid kit in the car. I'll just run grab it really quick. No. The voice shouted in anger before softening again. Just come a little closer. I can see your light. You're almost there. From where I was standing, the bridge blocked my view underneath it. But if I knelt down, I would be able to see. Slowly, I bent down and shined my flashlight across the rocks under the bridge. That's it, said the voice. A little farther. I panned the light to the left and saw a scrap of dirty white cloth. I stepped forward, looking closer. The cloth was part of an old stained dress. The woman's body lay brokenly among the rocks under the bridge. She looked like she had been dead for some time. When my light shined on the woman's face, she smiled. Her smile spread wider and wider, and her eyes took on a manic excitement. You found me, she said, before bending straight up at the waist, her joints cracking like old kindling. As I began to back away, she leapt to all fours and darted toward me. I turned and ran as fast as I could up the hill and back to my car, my heart pounding. I could hear her right behind me, her hands and feet scrambling across the ground like a deranged spider. Just before I made it to my car, I felt an impact on my back. She was on me, biting and scratching. I fell to the ground and rolled across the road, throwing her off of me. I jumped to my feet just as she lunged at me. I leapt back and swung the heavy maglite, striking her in the head. She recoiled in pain and fell to the ground, sobbing. Please don't hurt me, I just needed help, she cried, holding her hands up in defense. I stepped back in confusion. What? You attacked me, I shouted. No, I just needed help. And you hit me, she sobbed. I shook my head. I'm not doing this. Just stay back and I'll leave. I stepped back away from her to my car and opened the door. I only took my eyes off of her for a second, and suddenly she was on me again, slapping the flashlight away and knocking me to the ground. She dug her nails into my shoulders and chest as she tried to bite my face. Her eyes bulged and her teeth were impossibly large and jagged. I couldn't push her off of me, so I wrapped my hands around her neck and squeezed as tightly as I could, fear and adrenaline running through me. I squeezed my eyes closed and kept up the pressure until finally she slowly stopped fighting and went limp. I flung the body off of me and looked at it in horror. In death, she just looked like a normal woman, dirty and beaten, but normal. And I had killed her. I bent over and puked, disgusted and horrified at what I had just done. I had to get out of here. As I turned to get back into the car, the dead woman behind me started laughing. Looking back at the body, I could see she was still laying there, the toothy smile back in place, but her eyes were completely vacant. Please don't hurt me, she laughed. My breaths came quicker and quicker. What the fuck are you? Her head turned to face me as her smile spread even wider. I'm what you will become. In an instant, she was back on her feet and wrapping her hands around my neck. I felt my feet leave the ground as he squeezed my throat, tighter and tighter. I choked and kicked, but I couldn't break free. Her jaw unhinged and stretched, revealing row after row of jagged, serrated teeth. I couldn't believe it. This was the end, and I didn't even understand what was happening. Just as consciousness started to fade, I heard a boom, like a thunderclap as a flash lit up the sky. I fell to the ground, choking and gagging, one of the woman thing's arms still holding onto my throat. I managed to pry it loose and looked up to see the stunned look on her face. Another boom lit up the sky, and a burning hole appeared between the thing's eyes just before she crumpled to the ground in a pile of ash. I stood and looked back up the road, but I couldn't see anything. I heard him first, heavy footsteps accompanied by the jingle of spurs. Then out of the darkness, a pair of cold, glowing eyes. He was coming, and I wasn't waiting around to see what he wanted. I just needed to get the hell out of there. I jumped over the smoldering ash pile and into my car. I stomped on the gas pedal and tore across the bridge, praying I would find a way off of this fucking road. As I left the forested area, I pressed the accelerator even harder. The needle on the speedometer rose to 85, then to 100, then 120. I put the pedal to the floor and screamed out all of my fear, anger, and frustration. Time and miles passed in a haze. I never stopped. Several times I came to places on the road where someone or something wanted me to stop. A tree in the road, a hitchhiker waving for me to stop, another rickety bridge. None of it mattered. I had to keep going. I'd swerve around or drive over whatever was in my way. My car took a beating, but she never stopped. I saw the horseman a few more times. I think he even chased after me once. I didn't care, I just sped on. Whatever this place was, it had an end somewhere, a way out or a way back or something. I just had to keep driving. I woke up in the parking lot of a cafe. Glancing around, I saw several cars in the lot, and a big sign out front that said Al's. Through the window, I could see several people inside sitting and eating and going about their business. Had it all been a dream? Yeah, of course it was a dream. A long, terrible dream. I stepped out of my car and made my way to the door. I felt groggy and exhausted. That way you do after a restless night of sleep. I pushed open the cafe door and heard the bell jingle. Sitting at the counter, I motioned to the waitress and she came over. "Hey, hun, what'll it be?" I smiled up at her. "I could use a coffee." She nodded, coming right up. Setting a white mug on the counter, she filled it to the brim with the steaming beverage. I inhaled the aroma and smiled. I couldn't believe I was finally out of that nightmare. "You don't fucking belong here." I looked up at the waitress. "Excuse me?" I said. "Do you want sugar with that?" she said, grinning down at me. I blinked in confusion. No, I don't." The waitress smiled and nodded before turning back to the kitchen. I must still be a little out of it, I thought. Shaking my head, I took a sip from the mug and immediately spit it out. The coffee, it tasted like. I couldn't even bring myself to think it. I looked down at the mug and felt my stomach drop. What had just been a cupful of dark, warm coffee was now filled to the brim with a dark red liquid that smelled like copper and rot. I stumbled back from the counter, gagging and knocking over the stool, as the cafe erupted into laughter. I looked around at the cackling faces as the vile liquid in the mug began to pour over the brim and continued flowing out onto the floor, like some macabre fountain. No, I was still on that fucking road. Just as I was about to turn and run for my car, every single person in the diner stood up as one and turned to face me. The laughing stopped and their smiles were replaced with an expression of pure hatred. Then they began to speak. The trucker in the corner. "You're a unique one." The waitress behind the counter. "We don't get one like you here often." A little girl in a booth. "Not nearly often enough." An elderly man at the counter. "The halfways, always." A young woman at the register. "Taste." The cook by the flat top. "So." A mother of 3 by the door. "Much." All as one, sweeter. I stood there, petrified as the moment stretched. I have to get out of here, now. I ran for it. I was going to shove and punch and kick every single one of these fuckers out of my way if I had to. I didn't make it past the first one. It was a middle-aged balding man who looked like he weighed maybe 120 ibs. I tried to shove him and run past, but his skin was like one of those sticky mouse traps, and my arm got immediately stuck against his face. I tried to rip myself free, but the others began closing in around me, their hands reaching out to take hold of me. I could feel dozens of hands sticking to me and pulling from every direction. I didn't know what would break first, my body or my mind. I screamed in fear, and the assembly howled in joy. Just as I thought I would be ripped limb from limb, thunder boomed through the diner over and over again. The tacky hands began falling away, and I collapsed to the floor. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, I felt a different set of hands of me. Large, ice-cold hands. I felt myself being pulled to my feet and dragged through the diner and out into the parking lot. As I was thrown to the ground, I looked up at my savior and winced under the glare of those eyes. This was the closest I had seen him, and it was horrible. His skin was pale and sunken, like an aging corpse, and his white hair hung in strands down to his shoulders. He glared down at me and pointed one long finger. "Stay." His voice was deep and gravely, full of both age and power. He turned and started back to the diner, pulling two massive revolvers from his belt. Through the window of the cafe, I saw the corpses climbing to their feet. Most of them had large chunks missing from their bodies. One after another, the bodies began falling into each other. They clumped together in a fleshy, gore-coated mass, arms and legs and mouths jutting out in all directions. The mass began shifting its way to the door. All of the thing's eyes were still fixed on me. The pale gunslinger kicked the door open and began firing both thundering revolvers, knocking the thing back and blowing off massive chunks of smoldering flesh. I didn't stay to watch the rest. Even though he had saved my ass twice now, he still filled me with a kind of dread that was all-consuming. I jumped to my feet and ran around the massive black horse between me and my car. I cranked the engine to life and floored it away from the cafe and on down the road. I kept driving, and driving, and driving. Time lost all meaning. I never got hungry, never got thirsty, never stopped driving. I believed that I had found my way to hell. My suspicion was confirmed hundreds of miles later when I saw a bright neon sign up ahead in the distance, the Midway. I stood there on the gravel lot, staring up at the sign, the glow of the neon painting the night in shades of red and green. Only now could I see the snake for what it really was, an Ouroboros. The paradoxical serpent, forever eating its own tail. There was no end to the road. No end, no beginning, just an eternal loop of misery and darkness. I stared at the sign, my eyes following the coils of the snake around and around. My mind cracked even further, and I began to laugh. I doubled over and fell to the ground, laughing harder and harder, and for a while, I just slipped away. I don't know how long I lay there like that. After a time, I came back to myself. Sitting up from the cold ground and climbing to my feet, I made my way to the door and pushed through it. The bartender looked up from wiping down the bar top. "Back so soon?" I numbly walked over to the bar, sat down on a stool and met his eyes. "I have been driving for days, maybe even weeks. I can't even fucking tell anymore." The bartender nodded. Weeks, months, years. My eyes had dropped to the bat top, but shot back up at his words. Had it really been that long? He noticed my panic and chuckled. "They're just words. They don't really mean anything here." "So, is this hell?" I asked. He laughed. "No, it ain't hell. It's just the road." I shook my head in confusion. "But what is the road?" The bartender studied me for a moment before answering. "Well, some have called it purgatory or limbo, but it ain't really that either. This is the traveler's road. It's where the lost souls of travelers end up." My heart dropped. "So, I am dead." He shrugged. "Not entirely. I couldn't see it before, but there is still a thread of life within you." "Wait, what? I'm still alive?" He shrugged again. "Partially, your life is in the balance as we speak. I reckon that's why the writer has such an interest in you." "Why would that interest him?" "What is he?" I asked. "What he is, I don't rightly know. Around here, we just call him the writer. What I do know is that he is a hunter. He wanders through all worlds and finds things that don't belong, and removes them. You not being fully dead don't fully belong here. So, he isn't quite sure what to do with you." I thought about the woman from the bridge and how he reduced her to a pile of ash. Would that be my fate? I didn't think so. He had his chance to end me on the road. Instead, he protected me. On the road, there were things. Things that tried to kill me. He nodded. The unnaturals. Vengeful souls that died of unnatural or supernatural causes. They feed off of pain and fear. I swallowed a lump in my throat and asked, what would have happened if they killed me? His face turned grim. Then you would stay here and become one of them. I shuddered, thinking of the people in the diner. Were they lost souls too once? I didn't think I wanted to know the answer. If I die, will I stay here? He smiled sadly. I wish I could tell you you'd move on, but I don't know. My guess is that since you wound up here in the first place, this is where you'll be. I shook my head. But why? Kid, I still don't know why I'm here. Some people do move on from the road, but not many and not often. It's one of life and death's great mysteries. Just then I heard the snorting of a horse from outside, followed by heavy, spurred footsteps. I turned to face the door just as it swung open. As the rider entered the barroom, the temperature dropped. I felt goosebumps on my skin as I stood and met his gaze. Thank you, I said, my voice trembling. I took a steadying breath and started again. Thank you for helping me. He stared down at me with that terror-inducing gaze. The moment stretched, but I didn't look away. Eventually, the rider gave a small grunt and a nod of his head before turning and heading to his seat in the back of the bar. I turned back to sit back at the bar when I felt myself growing increasingly dizzy. My vision began to blur and I spun and fell to the floor. For a moment, all I could see was the dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. But then the bulb grew brighter and brighter, until all I could see was a blinding white light, and my ears were filled with a deafening ringing. Eventually, I was able to make out a distant voice. Hey kid, can you hear me? I tried to speak, but I had no voice. If you can hear me, follow the light. I did, or at least I tried to. Good, said the voice. Can you tell me your name? I blinked over and over again. My eyes were so dry. Hey, I think he's coming out of it. The voice was calling to someone else. Reality slammed back into place. I was on my back, with a flashlight in my face, surrounded by paramedics. I turned my head to look around. Someone told me not to move, but I had to see. My car was wrapped around a tree about 20 feet away. What time is it? I asked. The paramedic leaning over me looked down at her watch and said, 12:01. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I was alive. You must have been having some dream, said the paramedic as I was loaded into the ambulance. You were talking about bars and monsters and gunslingers. I think I would have liked to see that. I smiled. Despite the pain I was in, yeah, some dream. I'm just glad it's over. It was a dream, wasn't it? That's what I tell myself anyway. It had to be a dream. The heavy, jingling footsteps I heard as they closed the ambulance doors were just in my head, weren't they?